Hey friends! Glad you're here at Gringotts Hub. We've cooked up something special. What if a Gringotts blood ritual revealed Harry was the heir of all four founders and the eternal king of magic? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Ritual of True Blood. Harry woke up on the morning of his 16th birthday with the distinct and irritating sensation that he was supposed to be somewhere. Not in the vague, guilty way he sometimes felt about homework left unfinished or letters to Sirius he'd been meaning to write. This was specific. Directional. Like a compass needle swinging insistently toward magnetic north somewhere behind his sternum, pulling with quiet, relentless pressure toward, he didn't know what. Just somewhere. Just now. He lay on his back in the small bedroom at Grimmauld Place and stared at the ceiling and tried to decide if the feeling was worth paying attention to. The house was quiet in the particular way it got before 6 in the morning, when even Mrs. Black's portrait hadn't yet found a reason to start screaming. Gray summer light came through the curtains. Hedwig was asleep in her cage, one wing tucked over her face with the dignified disdain of a creature who considered early rising beneath her. Harry sat up. The pull didn't go away. It got, if anything, more insistent. He'd learned over the past 2 years not to ignore things that felt like this. Ignoring things had a way of escalating into life-threatening situations. So he got up, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt that actually fit him because Sirius had taken one look at Dudley's hand-me-downs and physically removed them from the house, and went downstairs to find his godfather. Sirius was already in the kitchen, which was either evidence of the same mysterious pull or, more likely, evidence that Sirius had simply never gone to sleep. He was sitting at the long kitchen table with a mug of something that steamed and a copy of the Daily Prophet that he appeared to be reading solely to find things to be annoyed about. Buckbeak was upstairs. The portrait of Sirius's mother was, mercifully, silent. "You're up early," Sirius said without looking up. "I keep feeling like I need to go somewhere." Harry sat down across from him. "Like, you know when you've forgotten something and you can't remember what it is, but you know it's important?" Sirius put down the paper. He looked at Harry with an expression that was hard to read, something between careful and curious. "What kind of feeling?" "Exactly." "Directional. Pulling sort of." "Toward," Harry frowned. "Toward Diagon Alley, actually. Now that I think about it. Toward Gringotts specifically." Sirius was quiet for long enough that Harry started paying close attention. "What?" Harry said. "I've been meaning to bring something up," Sirius said slowly, wrapping both hands around his mug. "I kept putting it off because, honestly, because I wasn't sure how to start the conversation. But your father left instructions. For your 16th birthday. With Gringotts." Harry waited. "He left instructions that you were to undergo something called a heritage identification ritual on your 16th birthday. Goblin magic. Old. He was very specific about the timing." Sirius paused. "I found it in his personal correspondence when I was going through things here. There was a note with my name on it, asking me to make sure it happened." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I read up on heritage identification rituals and they're not always comfortable, Harry. The results can be significant. I wanted to think about how to prepare you." He looked faintly guilty. "And then I kept thinking about it for another few days, and then you apparently woke up this morning being magnetically dragged toward Gringotts, so clearly the magic has its own opinions about preparation time." Harry looked at him steadily. "What kind of significant results?" "The kind that can change how you understand your entire family history." Sirius met his eyes. "I want you to know that whatever comes out of that room today, it doesn't change anything between us. You're James's son. That's not in question. You're being incredibly ominous before 6 in the morning." "I'm being honest." Sirius almost smiled. "There's a difference. Can we go now?" Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then he stood up, leaving his mug on the table. "Yeah," he said. "We can go now." Hermione arrived at Grimmauld Place at 7:15 in a state of barely contained urgency that suggested she'd received Sirius's flu message approximately 30 seconds ago and had been moving at high speed ever since. She appeared in the kitchen fireplace with her bushy hair only half tamed and a book already tucked under her arm, which Harry found both completely predictable and genuinely comforting. "Heritage identification ritual," she said immediately, not even bothering with a proper greeting. 16th birthday. James Potter left specific instructions. She looked at Harry. "I read about these last year when I was going through the history of goblin magical practice. They're extraordinarily rare. The goblins don't offer them to just anyone. They require a specific kind of magical lineage to even register properly." "Good morning to you too," Harry said. She waved this aside. "What kind of specific magical lineage?" she directed at Sirius. "That's what we're going to find out." "Right." She sat down, opened her book, found the page she wanted with the efficiency of someone who had bookmarked it in advance, and started reading with her finger tracing lines. "The heritage identification ritual uses the subject's blood as a kind of magical autobiography. It doesn't just trace paternal or maternal lines. It reads the full genetic and magical inheritance across every bloodline simultaneously. The results are written in what's called the blood ledger, which is," she stopped. "Which is what?" Harry said. "Which is a goblin document that carries the same legal weight as a birth certificate, a property deed, and a declaration before the Wisengamot combined." She looked up. The expression on her face was one he recognized, the particular expression she wore when information was rearranging itself in her head faster than she could quite process it. "Harry, if anything significant comes out of this ritual, it isn't just personal information. It's a legal document with binding magical weight." "Then we'd better go find out what it says," Harry said. He wasn't nervous, exactly. The pulling sensation in his chest had settled into something steadier and more certain now that he was moving toward it, like the compass needle finding north and going still. Whatever was waiting at Gringotts, it felt less like a threat and more like recognition. Like turning a corner and finding something you'd been looking for without knowing you were looking. He couldn't explain that. He didn't try to. They went. Diagon Alley in early morning was a different place entirely from the busy, crowded street Harry knew from school supply runs. The shops were just opening, their windows bright against the grey morning. The cobblestones were still damp. A witch in working robes was unlocking the door to the apothecary. Two wizards were arguing quietly outside the post office. And there was Gringotts, at the far end of the alley, white and enormous and certain of itself in the way that only very old things with very sharp teeth could be. Harry walked toward it and the pulling sensation in his chest grew from a compass needle to something more like a current, steady and warm and deeply patient, as if whatever waited at the end of this was capable of waiting another 1,000 years if it had to, but had been hoping he'd show up today. The goblin at the front entrance, tall for a goblin, which still put him at roughly chest height on Harry, with a face like a cliff face and eyes like old copper, looked at Harry, and then did something Harry had never seen a Gringotts goblin do before. He bowed. Not the shallow incline that passed for professional courtesy in the wizarding world. A real bow. Deliberate and deep, with something in it that felt less like servility and more like acknowledgement. Sirius made a small, controlled sound behind him. Hermione's hand gripped the spine of her book harder. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. His voice was like gravel given language. "We have been expecting you. I am Ragnarok, Senior Director of the Gringotts Heritage Division. If you would follow me." Harry had been inside Gringotts dozens of times. He had never been anywhere except the main hall with its long counters and its rushing carts and its magnificent carved ceiling. Ragnarok led them through a door set into the marble wall behind the counters, a door Harry had never noticed before, which felt significant, and down a corridor that went steadily deeper into the earth. The walls here were not the polished marble of the public areas. They were raw stone, and they were old. Older than the building above. Older, probably, than the street above that. Torches in iron brackets gave off warm, orange light that made the stone look like it was breathing. The air smelled like deep water and hot metal. The heritage ritual chamber, Ragnarok said, stopping before a circular door set in the stone, has been prepared since this morning's first hour. The magic sensed the approach of the subject and activated of its own accord. He glanced at Harry. This does not happen often. How often? Hermione asked. In my lifetime. Ragnarok considered. Never. He pressed one gray, long-fingered hand to the door and it swung inward without sound. The room beyond was small and circular, the walls carved with interlocking patterns that moved, not like enchanted paintings, but like water in a stream, constant and purposeful and entirely without end. In the center of the room was a stone basin about the size of a large birdbath, filled with something that was not quite liquid and not quite light. It responded to Harry's entrance by brightening, the surface shifting from silver to gold and back again. There was a stone chair beside the basin. There was nothing else in the room. The ritual is simple in its mechanics, Ragnarok said, stepping in and closing the door behind them. He spoke the way someone speaks when they are choosing each word for accuracy rather than reassurance. A single cut across the palm. The blood falls into the revealing basin. The basin reads the full magical inheritance and writes the result in the blood ledger, which will be produced at the ritual's conclusion. The process takes between 5 minutes and an hour, depending on the complexity of the inheritance. He paused. We have cleared the morning schedule. Harry looked at the basin. The light it gave off was warm on his face, and the pulling sensation in his chest had completely transformed now. It was no longer a pull, it was a recognition, something responding to his presence the way a fire responds to oxygen, growing calm and bright and certain. He sat in the stone chair. The basin was right at hand level. Will it hurt? He asked. Ragnarok's expression shifted by approximately 2 degrees toward what Harry suspected was respect. The cut, briefly. The ritual itself, he paused. The ritual may show you things. It is not magic's nature to lie, and truth sometimes discomforts. All right. Harry looked up at Sirius, who was standing by the wall with his arms crossed and his expression doing something complicated and careful. Hermione had her book closed for once, both hands free, watching him with bright, serious eyes. Whatever it says, Sirius said quietly, you're still you. Harry nodded. He looked at Ragnarok. Let's do it. The goblin produced a blade that was clearly ceremonial but clearly also very sharp, a curved thing, gold-handled, with runes etched along its edge that seemed to shift when looked at directly. He handed it to Harry, handle first, with the formality of someone completing a ritual act that had very specific requirements. Harry took it. He turned his left palm up over the basin. He drew the blade across the meaty part of his palm, just below the fingers. It did hurt. But the pain was brief and clean, and immediately after came something else, a sensation that started at the cut and moved up his arm, into his chest, outward through every limb simultaneously, like a warm tide going out. Not unpleasant. More like stretching a muscle you'd forgotten you had. The first drop of blood fell into the basin. And the room changed. The walls stopped their slow movement. Every carved pattern froze, then blazed with sudden light, gold first, then silver, then red, then green, then a fourth color that Harry couldn't quite name, something between blue and violet and the color of very deep water, and those 4 colors braided together so naturally it was clear they had always been intended to exist that way. The basin blazed. Harry felt something enormous move through him, something that had no size because it was bigger than size, a presence, plural and singular at once, ancient and immediate, recognizing him the way the deepest part of a river recognizes a tributary. This was family. Not James and Lily, though they were in there too, warm and bright and unambiguous. This was something much, much older. Multiple lines of inheritance converging from different centuries, different families, different continents of magical history, all arriving at the same point. Him. He heard Hermione make a sound that was not quite a word. He saw Sirius put one hand against the wall. Ragnar stood perfectly still and watched with the expression of someone who has just had their most significant professional hypothesis confirmed. The light in the basin built and built, all four colors writhing together, and then released, not explosively, but completely, flooding the room with warmth that had weight to it, that pressed gently against Harry's skin like the first real sunlight after a long winter. And then it was over. The light faded. The walls resumed their slow, water-like movement. The basin returned to its ordinary silver shimmer. On the stone floor, a document had appeared. Not paper, something firmer. Parchment made from something that did not feel entirely like animal skin. The writing on it was gold and it was not in English. Ragnar moved forward with the controlled urgency of someone trying not to run and picked up the blood ledger. He read it in silence for approximately 30 seconds, which felt much longer. Then he looked up at Harry. His copper eyes were doing something very complex. "Mr. Potter," he said. And stopped. "What does it say?" Harry asked. He heard how steady his own voice was and was vaguely surprised by it. Ragnar read aloud, and the words came out in a tone that was absolutely, scrupulously neutral, which somehow made each line land harder than drama would have. Paternal line, Potter, Evans, he continued reading, names and dates and magical inheritance markers threading back through generations with the metronomic certainty of recorded truth, and Harry tracked it with half his attention while the other half catalogued what it felt like, this moment, this particular moment, in this small stone room below London streets, while the morning world went about its business entirely unaware. The paternal line was extraordinary. The Potter family's magical inheritance traced back through generations of notable witches and wizards, and behind them, centuries further back, to, Sirius inhaled sharply, the line of Godric Gryffindor himself. Direct. Unambiguous. 700 years old in the bloodline and still singing. That was significant. That was the kind of significant that explained things, the sorting hat's consideration, the sword in the chamber of secrets, the quality of the Patronus. But Ragnar wasn't finished. The maternal line, Evans, Lillian, came with its own weight. Lily Potter's magical inheritance, when read by goblin blood magic rather than wizarding genealogy, reached back not through Muggle ancestry as everyone had assumed, but through an obscured, partially obliterated family line to, Ragnar paused for the first time, Rowena Ravenclaw. The room was very quiet. "That's not possible," Hermione said, and she said it in the voice of someone who knows perfectly well that it is possible and is just having difficulty making the adjustment in real time. "The blood ledger does not lie," Ragnar said mildly. The Evans family line carried Ravenclaw descent through 7 generations of undocumented magical inheritance, the record of which was deliberately obscured. The ledger indicates magical interference with the family records, consistent with a systematic concealment of lineage. "Someone hid it," Harry said. "Someone hid it," Ragnar confirmed. He continued reading. The secondary maternal line, Lily Potter's grandmother's mother's line, further back, more diluted but completely legible to goblin magic, carried the inheritance of Helga Hufflepuff. Patience, warmth, the deep-root magic of growth and nurturing that had made Hufflepuff's gardens legendary. 3 founders now. 3 lines converging. Harry was watching Sirius. His godfather had gone very still, the kind of stillness that happened when someone was doing extremely rigorous emotional mathematics. And then Ragnar read the final section. The Slytherin line came not through any connection Harry might have expected, not through Parseltongue, not through Voldemort's curse, not through anything dark or parasitic. It came through a line so old and so obscured that it predated the House of Gaunt by 2 centuries, a legitimate descent from Salazar Slytherin's eldest daughter, who had married into a family that had, over generations, blended into the broader magical population and been forgotten as what they were. The Parseltongue was inheritance, not infection. It had always been his. "All 4, Hermione said. She was not reading from her book. She was looking at Harry with an expression he'd never seen on her before, something beyond analysis, something that was just, wonder. "Harry. All four founders. There is more, Ragnarok said. Harry looked at him. The heritage ritual does not only read bloodline, the goblin said. He placed the ledger very carefully on the edge of the basin and looked at Harry with full attention, not the professional attention of a banker, but the genuine, complicated attention of someone encountering something they understand to be rare beyond calculation. It also reads the magical compact attached to the subject's inheritance. The compact activated upon the completion of this ritual. A pause. Signed into magical law by all four founders at the time of Hogwarts' establishment, ratified by the 13 oldest magical families of Britain, and sealed with the kind of old magic that does not require the Ministry of Magic's acknowledgement because it predates the Ministry of Magic by 400 years. What compact? Sirius asked. His voice was very controlled. Ragnarok's eyes moved to Harry and stayed there. The Founders' Compact stipulated that in the event of a convergence, the word they used was confluence, in the event of a single living magical being carrying the genuine inherited blood of all four founders simultaneously, that being would hold the sovereign authority over the magical world of Britain as, he read the exact phrasing with great care. Rex Perpetuus Magici. He looked up. The Eternal King of Magic. The torchlight in the room seemed, for just a moment, to burn brighter. That's, Hermione started, stopped, started again. That's not a title. That's not ceremonial. In the historical context of when that compact was written, that means the legal authority of the authority supersedes the Ministry of Magic, the Wiesengemot, and all hereditary holdings within the boundaries of magical Britain, Ragnarok said. He wasn't reading from the ledger anymore. He was reciting from memory, and his voice had taken on a different quality, not reverent, exactly, but precise in the way that people are precise about things that matter enormously. The title has never been activated in the 700 years since the compact was written. Until now. Harry sat in the stone chair and looked at the basin and didn't say anything for a moment. He didn't feel like a king. He felt like himself, like Harry, who'd grown up in a cupboard under the stairs and who still sometimes flinched when adults raised their voices, who liked Quidditch and treacle tart and had approximately 3 people in the world who made him feel like the floor wouldn't disappear under his feet without warning. But underneath all of that, underneath every layer of ordinary and familiar and small, there was something else. The warmth that had moved through him during the ritual hadn't gone away. It had settled. Deep and steady as geological pressure. For distinct qualities to it, Gryffindor's bright, blazing courage, Ravenclaw's crystalline clarity, Hufflepuff's immovable, bedrock certainty, Slytherin's deep, patient, river-cold purpose, woven into something that was recognizably him, that had always been him, that he'd simply never had the language for before. He looked up at Ragnarok. The compact, he said. What does it actually require of me? Not theoretically. Practically. Ragnarok's expression shifted again, slightly, fractionally, but Harry caught it. Something that was, he thought, approval. It requires nothing that you do not choose to claim. The title does not compel. It authorizes. He paused. The question, Mr. Potter, is not what the compact requires. The question is what you intend. We need time, Sirius said, stepping forward. He needs to understand what all of this means before, of course, Ragnarok said smoothly. The blood ledger is yours, and a copy will be retained by Gringotts per the terms of the compact. The ritual is complete. The inheritance is confirmed. He looked at Harry again. The magic, however, does not wait for policy to catch up with it. The compact activated the moment the ritual concluded. You are, as of this morning, what the document says you are. Regardless of whether you are yet ready to use it. He said it without drama. That was somehow the most unsettling part. The absolute, bureaucratic certainty of it. Harry stood up. He picked up the blood ledger from the edge of the basin and held it, and it was warm in his hands, faintly, like something recently used. One more question, he said to Ragnarok. Of course. You said someone deliberately hid my mother's lineage. You said there was magical interference with the family records. He watched the goblin's face with Slytherin-sharp patience. How old is that interference? Ragnar's copper eyes were very steady. Approximately 35 years. 35 years ago. Before Harry was born. Before his parents met, even. Someone had found the Evans bloodline and deliberately buried it. And the concealment magic, Harry said. What kind was it? Whose signature does it carry? Ragnar was quiet for exactly one deliberate beat. The magical signature analysis would require further examination of the archived records, he said. However, the style of concealment magic is consistent with the work of a highly skilled wizard operating at the height of his abilities. Another pause. The archival records would naturally be available to the holder of the blood ledger, should he wish to examine them. I'll want to examine them, Harry said. Today. We anticipated that, Ragnar said, and there was something very small and very dry in his voice that might, in another species, have been called humor. The archivist is ready. He turned toward the door, and Harry followed him, and behind him he heard Hermione murmur to Sirius in a voice that was barely a breath, Sirius. The wards. Harry hadn't noticed it on the way in. He noticed it now, on the way out, as they stepped back into the torchlit corridor. The wards at the entrance to the corridor, carved runes along the stone, protective enchantments that had presumably been there for centuries, were glowing. Softly, gold and quiet, but unmistakably active in a way they had not been before. Not in warning. In recognition. As if every piece of magic the goblins had built into this place, over centuries of careful, proud work, had registered the change in the room behind them and was paying attention now. Paying attention to Harry. He walked down the corridor toward the archive room, and the torches, as he passed each one, burned fractionally brighter. The archive was 3 levels deeper and smelled powerfully of time, dust and old parchment and the particular dry cold that came with truly ancient storage. Ragnar handed them off to an older goblin named Thistlecroft, who moved through the stacked shelves of rolled parchment and leather-bound ledgers with the ease of someone who knew every inch by heart. The Evans family records, when produced, were a modest stack, less than an inch thick, which told its own story given that most family records of comparable age ran to several volumes. Hermione spread them on the reading table and had the gaps catalogued within 10 minutes. She did it with her lips pressed together and the controlled efficiency she used when she was angry and trying not to be yet. Someone removed approximately 4 generations of records, she said. Not the whole family, just the specific lineage connecting Lily Evans back through her grandmother's side. Everything else is intact. She looked up. This is surgical. This wasn't someone covering their tracks in a hurry. This was careful. Deliberate. Someone knew exactly which threads to pull. 35 years ago, Harry said. Which is, 1960, Sirius said quietly from the corner. He was leaning against the shelves with his arms crossed and an expression Harry couldn't fully read. 2 years before your mum started Hogwarts. The implication sat in the room without anyone needing to say it. Someone had found Lily Evans, a young muggle-raised girl, not yet at Hogwarts, who carried in her blood the convergence inheritance that would, combined with the Potter line, create the eternal king of magic, and had buried that knowledge before it could become public record. The magical signature, Harry said to Thistlecroft. Can you read it? Off the interference on the records? The old goblin had been standing quietly to one side, hands folded. He moved now to the records and ran long fingers along the edges of several documents, not quite touching, reading something in the disturbance of the air around them. He was quiet for a long time. Old magic, he said finally. Strong magic. Very, he made a sound that didn't translate directly, something between consideration and concern. Very careful magic. The kind that wants to be invisible. He looked at Harry with ancient, opaque eyes. The wizard who cast this wanted no credit. No trace. They wanted the concealment itself to be concealed. But you can read it, Harry said. Goblin magic reads things that human magic tries to hide, Thistlecroft said simply. The signature is there. It is old. I would need time to identify it with certainty. His eyes held Harry's. But I can tell you one thing without analysis. Whoever this wizard was, they knew what they were hiding. They knew what the Evans bloodline carried. They knew about the Convergence inheritance. They knew what it would mean. The air in the archive room was very still. Which means, Hermione said slowly, and there was something in her voice that was working through the implications in real time, each word careful and deliberate, that someone else knew. Someone knew Harry was coming. Before Harry was even born. Before his parents even met. Someone knew that this was possible and they tried to prevent it. Or they tried to control it, Sirius said. His voice was flat and careful, and he was staring at the far wall with the expression of a man thinking very hard about something he doesn't want to say yet. Harry looked at him. Not yet, Sirius said, and it wasn't dismissive, it was the voice of a man who loved him and needed more information before he was willing to hand Harry a suspicion that could become a wound. Let me think about it. Let's get home first. Harry nodded. He picked up the blood ledger again and looked at the gold writing that he couldn't read directly but that he could feel, warm and certain and absolutely, irreversibly true. Rex Perpetuus Magici. The Eternal King of Magic. He'd walked into this building this morning as a 16-year-old boy who'd survived things he shouldn't have survived and been chosen for things he hadn't asked for and had been told, repeatedly, in various ways by various people, that his value was primarily in his willingness to die heroically at the right moment. He walked out of it as something else entirely. And the magical world noticed. It was a small thing, first. A goblin at the main counter looked up as they passed through the hall and his eyes tracked Harry with the same careful attention Ragnarok had shown at the entrance. Then another. Then the clerk nearest the door, who paused mid-transaction to watch Harry cross the marble floor, not in the wide-eyed, "It's Harry Potter" way Harry had spent his whole life fielding, but in something quieter and more fundamental. Recognition of a different order. They stepped out into Diagon Alley and the morning was fully underway now, the street busy with witches and wizards going about ordinary business in the warm summer light. Someone was hawking early editions of The Prophet. Children were pressing their faces against the windows of quality Quidditch supplies. And something changed in the air of Diagon Alley. Not dramatically. Not with lightning or earthquake or spectacle. But the wards, the dozens of layered protective enchantments that wizards had been building into this street for centuries, hummed. All of them, together, at once, a single note of recognition that lasted perhaps 3 seconds and probably went unnoticed by everyone except a few very old and very perceptive witches and wizards who would pause in their morning errands and look around with vaguely puzzled expressions and not quite be able to identify why they suddenly felt like something important had just shifted in the world. Hermione felt it. She reached out and grabbed Harry's arm, not in fear, in pure, electrified excitement. The wards knew, she breathed. Harry, every ward on this street just registered, I know, Harry said. He stopped in the middle of Diagon Alley and stood very still and felt it, felt the magic of this place reaching toward him the way it had in the ritual room, the same quality of recognition, the same warmth and certainty, but broader now. Wider. Like standing in a river and feeling the current of the whole river through you. This was what it felt like to be the anchor. Not to control. Not to dominate. To be the fixed point that everything else in the magical world quietly oriented itself toward, whether the Ministry acknowledged it or not, whether Dumbledore had planned for it or not, whether anyone was ready for it at all. He exhaled. We should go home, he said. There's a lot to talk about. He said it calmly. No trembling in his voice. No wide-eyed shock. Just, clarity. The calm of someone who has been confused for a very long time and has just, unexpectedly, stopped being confused. Sirius put a hand briefly on his shoulder, warm and brief and saying more than words, and they turned and walked back through the alley, and the morning sunlight lay on the cobblestones like something that was noticing them back. Behind them, at the top of the white steps, Ragnarok stood watching. He watched until Harry turned the corner and disappeared from view, and then he went back inside, and he said something to the clerk at the nearest counter that caused that clerk to go immediately and find paper and a quill. There were people who needed to know that the compact had activated. Not all of them were friends. Chapter 2, The Weight of Ancient Names. The kitchen at Grimmauld Place had a long table that had hosted order meetings, arguments, Christmas dinners, and at least one incident involving Fred and George that had permanently scorched one corner of the ceiling. Harry spread the blood ledger across its center, and the four of them, Harry, Hermione, Sirius, and the creeping awareness that the morning had fundamentally reordered everything, arranged themselves around it. Hermione had retrieved 3 more books from her bag. Harry had no idea how her bag contained 3 books she hadn't walked in with, and he'd stopped asking questions like that years ago. "Right," she said, opening the first one to a page she'd apparently already found, because she'd known approximately what she was looking for before she even knew for certain what she'd find. The Founder's Compact. "I've read about it twice, once in a history of magic and once in a more specialized text I found in the Hogwarts library 3rd year. Both sources treated it as largely theoretical. Historical curiosity. A provision that would never activate because the conditions were considered impossible. Because no one believed all 4 bloodlines could converge in a single person," Sirius said. "Because no one believed it had. There's a difference." She looked at Harry. "The compact isn't theoretical anymore. It's the most significant legal document in Wizarding Britain, and it activated this morning, and the Ministry doesn't know yet." She paused. "We have, I would estimate, hours before someone at Gringotts notifies someone with Ministry connections. Maybe less." "Ragnarok said there were people who needed to know," Harry said. His exact words were careful. He didn't say who. "Goblins have their own interests," Sirius said. He wasn't saying it negatively, he was saying it the way you'd say the river flows downhill. As simple fact. The compact gives the holder of the title sovereign authority over magical Britain. Which includes, theoretically, Gringotts. The goblins have been chafing under Ministry regulation for 3 centuries. A genuine Rex Perpetuus Magici would have the authority to renegotiate that relationship from scratch. "So they want Harry to use the title," Hermione said. "They want Harry to be what he is," Sirius corrected. "There's a difference there too." Harry was looking at the ledger. The gold writing caught the morning light and threw small reflections across the kitchen ceiling. He'd been trying, on the walk back, to assess what he actually felt, not what he was supposed to feel, not what would make a good story, but what was actually happening inside him. The answer was complicated and not particularly dramatic. He felt as though someone had taken a picture that had been slightly out of focus his entire life and turned a single dial. Just, click. In focus. Everything that had been vague and slightly blurred, his instincts, his power, his sense of who he was under, the survival and the expectations and the chronic low-grade uncertainty, had sharpened into something clear and present. He didn't feel like a king. He felt like himself, but a version of himself that was no longer apologizing for taking up space. "The compact language," he said. "Walk me through it. What does sovereign authority actually mean in practice? Not the ceremonial version. The real version." Hermione's eyes lit up in the way they did when someone asked exactly the right question. "Okay. In the context of the Compact's era, mid-10th century, before the International Statute of Secrecy, before the Ministry of Magic as we know it, sovereign authority over magical Britain meant 3 things." She held up fingers. First, final arbitration on disputes between magical beings. Goblins, wizards, magical creatures, the Rex Perpetuus was the court of last appeal above all existing structures. Second, the right to make, modify, or dissolve magical law, provided the compact's ethical provisions were met, which basically amounts to a prohibition against laws that harm magical beings without cause. Third, she paused, and something in her expression became very careful. Third, the right to claim and wield the full institutional magic of Hogwarts. Meaning what? Meaning Hogwarts was built as the seat of power for the Compact. The founders didn't just build a school. They built the architectural embodiment of their combined magical authority. The castle has its own magic, you know that, everyone knows that, the moving staircases, the sentient portraits, the way it responds to certain people. She leaned forward. Those aren't quirks, Harry. That's the sovereign infrastructure. The castle is the throne. And by the terms of the compact, it belongs to whoever holds the title. The kitchen was very quiet. So Dumbledore, Sirius said slowly, is technically operating Hogwarts without full legitimate authority, if the compact is valid and active, Hermione said. She clearly found this uncomfortable to say and said it anyway because it was true. I don't mean that as a criticism of Dumbledore specifically. No one has held the title in 7 centuries. The castle has been, in a kind of regency, I suppose, running itself. But the compact says, it says the castle answers to me, Harry said. Hermione nodded. Then, because she was Hermione, although the practical implications of what that means are not entirely clear, and I think we need to be very careful about making claims before we fully understand, Hermione. Yes. Breathe. She breathed. Sorry. I'm processing. I know. So am I. He looked at Sirius. You were going to tell me something. In the archive. You stopped yourself. Sirius got up and went to the counter, and put the kettle on, and kept his back to the table for a moment. Just long enough for Harry to recognize that he was choosing his words. James didn't just know about the heritage ritual because it was family tradition, Sirius said. He told me about it once. We were 17, I think, maybe 18, and we've been going through the Potter family history for completely unrelated reasons, something to do with an animagus reference, actually. A pause. He said his grandfather had found something in the bloodline records. Something that suggested the Potters carried a founder's descent. Just the one, at that point, Gryffindor. But his grandfather had written in his personal journal that the magical inheritance felt, amplified, denser than it should have been from a single line. He turned around. The kettle was heating behind him. James thought, and he never told anyone this, I'm telling you something he told me in confidence when we were teenagers, he thought that the inheritance might eventually converge. He thought it was possible that if the right bloodlines met, the compact might activate. A breath. He met your mother in 6th year and he fell completely and immediately and catastrophically in love with her, the way James did everything. But he had the Potter family instinct about it. The sense that this was important in a way that was bigger than both of them. He knew about Mum's bloodline. Harry asked. I don't think he knew the specifics. I think he felt it. James had very good instincts and very bad habits around taking those instincts seriously. Sirius's voice was warm and sad and fond. The point is, someone else knew. Someone else who had access to the Potter family records and the Evans family records at the same time. And they didn't feel the same warmth about it that James did. They hid Mum's bloodline, Harry said. 35 years ago. Before they even met. Before they met. Which means whoever it was had access to both lines independently and understood what they could produce together. He looked at Harry steadily. And then 14 years ago, Voldemort was told about a prophecy that had 2 possible subjects, and he chose your parents. The kitchen was very quiet again, and this quiet had teeth. You think it wasn't random, Harry said. I think someone made sure Voldemort found out about the prophecy, Sirius said. I think someone made sure the information pointed to the Potters specifically. And I think the reason for that was to eliminate the convergence before it could occur. Sirius, Hermione said carefully, that's an enormous claim. I know. It implies that someone with advanced knowledge of the convergence, and the motivation to prevent it, had enough influence to direct Voldemort's attention. Yes. The number of people with that combination of knowledge, motivation, and influence is very small. I know that too. Hermione looked at him for a long moment, and Harry watched her work through the same conclusion that was forming in his own mind, the one neither of them wanted to say yet because saying it would make it real, and real meant having to decide what to do with it. Not yet, Harry said, almost exactly echoing what Sirius had said in the archive. He said it to both of them. We get more information first. Then we decide. Sirius looked at him with an expression that was extremely proud and trying not to show it. When did you get this calm? This morning, actually. Harry picked up the blood ledger. I need to understand something about the compact structure. The sovereign authority, can it be challenged? Legally? Hermione was already in book 2. Yes and no, she said, flipping pages. The compact can't be invalidated, it's sealed with the Founder's own magic, and that's not the kind of magic that dissolves. But there are provisions for, she found the passage. Here. There are provisions for what the compact calls obstruction of legitimate authority. Essentially, if a recognized governing body refuses to acknowledge the title, the Rex Perpetuus can invoke what's called the sovereignty claim directly before the Wisengamot. Which means going public, Harry said. Which means going public. But Harry, she closed the book and looked at him straight. When you go public with this, everything changes. Voldemort, the Ministry, Dumbledore, every political faction in magical Britain, everyone's calculations change the moment they know what you are. Good, Harry said. Hermione and Sirius both looked at him. I'm tired, Harry said, with a simplicity that was not petulance but pure honesty, of other people's calculations being made around me without my knowledge. I'm tired of being the piece on the board that doesn't know it's being moved. He set the ledger down with a quiet, firm sound. So yes. Everything changes. That seems correct. The kettle came to a boil. Sirius made tea with the slightly mechanical efficiency of a man who needed something to do with his hands, and nobody spoke for a moment, and then Harry felt it. He felt it before he heard it, a vibration, deep and resonant, that started somewhere in the foundations of the building and moved upward through the floor and the walls, not threatening, not hostile, more like a note. A single sustained note played on an instrument too large to see. Warm. Ancient. Reaching. Did you feel that? Hermione said. Yes, Sirius said. Harry, that was Hogwarts, Harry said. He said it with complete certainty, the way you say the name of something you've just recognized. That was Hogwarts. The castle was 200 miles north of them. It should not have been possible to feel it in a London townhouse in the middle of summer. And yet the vibration was there, unmistakable and specific, with a quality that Harry could only describe as personal. Like the difference between a crowd noise and someone saying your name. The compact activated, Hermione said softly. The castle, it felt it. It's reaching out. Can it do that? Sirius asked. According to everything I know about Hogwarts foundational magic, no. It should be fixed to the physical structure. It shouldn't be able to extend this far. She paused. But I think we're operating outside of should now. Harry placed his palm flat on the kitchen table, a reflex without conscious intention, and focused on the warmth that was coming from the direction of Scotland, distant and patient and unmistakable. Like following a thread. Like a voice across a great distance not quite resolving into words but carrying something older than words. I know you, was the impression. Not a sentence. A knowing. He exhaled. I know you too, he murmured. You're talking to the castle, Sirius said. Apparently. While sitting at my kitchen table. It reached out first. Sirius sat down heavily and put his tea down and rubbed his face, and Harry looked at him and felt something shift in his chest, not the grand, geological warmth of the compact inheritance, but the smaller, realer warmth of looking at the closest thing he had to a father and understanding that the world changing didn't require this to change. Sirius. This doesn't, we're still, I know, Sirius said, through his hands. I know we are. He lowered his hands and his eyes were bright in the way that had nothing to do with crying and everything to do with not crying. I used to daydream in Azkaban about what you'd be like. You know. Just, to get through it. I'd think, James and Lily's boy, growing up. What would he be, what would he care about, what would he laugh at? He shook his head. I did not imagine this. Sorry. Don't apologize. It's brilliant. He picked up his tea. Absolutely terrifying, but brilliant. Hermione laughed, which broke the intensity of the moment cleanly, and Harry smiled, and outside Grimmauld Place the morning carried on in its ordinary way with no idea what was happening at a kitchen table in a townhouse behind a Fidelius charm in London. That ordinariness had, Harry knew, an expiration date. He could feel the clock on it. Hours, Hermione had said. Maybe less. We need a plan, he said. Yes, Hermione agreed, pulling her third book forward. We need several. They worked through the morning and into the early afternoon with the focused, slightly manic energy of people who understood that the window of quiet preparation was closing and wanted to use every minute of it. Hermione built a legal framework from 3 books and a stack of notes. Sirius drafted a list of people who would need to be told and in what order, rating them by reliability and potential response. Harry read through the blood ledger section by section, not the parts he couldn't read, the formal Latin of the compact, but the inheritance records, the long list of names and dates and magical qualifications that spelled out, in the flat, unambiguous language of goblin record-keeping, exactly who he was. James Potter, son of Fleamont. Fleamont, son of Henry. Henry, son of, backward and backward, each name accompanied by its magical inheritance markers, and there at every significant point in the paternal line the Gryffindor signature, not fading with distance as diluted inheritance usually did, but growing, actually growing in intensity across generations as if the bloodline had been, deliberately cultivated. Not by dark magic. Not manipulated. Just, chosen. Generations of Potters who had, through whatever combination of instinct and magic and luck, consistently partnered with people whose own inheritances amplified rather than diluted the founder bloodline. His father's family had been building toward this for centuries without knowing it. His mother's family had been hidden. The concealment on Mum's bloodline, Harry said, not looking up from the ledger. If it was put there 35 years ago, that's after the Potters had already been building the Gryffindor line for generations. Whoever hid it knew about the Potters. They were reacting to what the Potters were becoming. Preventive, Hermione said without looking up from her own notes. They saw the Potter line moving towards something and they moved to sever the connection before it could complete. So they knew, Harry said. Whoever it was, they understood the compact. They understood that if the right bloodlines met, the flue erupted. Not with fire. With impact. A green flash that filled the kitchen with unnatural light and brought with it the displaced air pressure of a very fast, very forceful flue connection, and then a figure stepped through who was not someone Harry had expected to see today and who had clearly run to get to a fireplace. Minerva McGonagall was not a person who ran. She was a person who moved with the controlled, efficient precision of someone who had decided that urgency and dignity were not mutually exclusive. She arrived in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place with her tartan robes perfectly straight and her expression set in the particular configuration that meant she was operating at high emotional intensity while allowing none of it into her face. Her eyes went to Harry immediately and stayed there. "It's true," she said. It wasn't a question. Harry looked at her. How fast did word travel? I received an owl from a contact at Gringotts 40 minutes ago. A goblin contact I have maintained for 20 years. She moved to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat with the decisive authority of someone who had decided she was staying. I have been aware, in the abstract, of the Heritage Compact since my 4th year at Hogwarts, when I found a reference to it in a restricted section text that Professor Dumbledore had assigned for completely unrelated reasons. I have thought about it perhaps twice since. She paused. The blood ledger. Harry slid it across the table. She read it. She read the whole thing, which took time, and nobody spoke while she did. When she finished, she placed it back on the table with hands that were entirely steady, and she looked at Harry, and what was in her expression was something Harry had never seen there before. Not the warmth she hid, not the strict professional regard she showed in public, not even the private fondness she extended to him on difficult days. This was something else. Something that sat very close to awe and was clearly uncomfortable with itself. "Your mother," she said quietly. "Lily was the most talented student in 30 years of teaching. I always knew the magic was extraordinary, the quality of it, the depth. I told Albus once that I had never seen a student whose magic had that quality of," she stopped. "Composed herself. Of rootedness. As if the magic had been growing in the same place for a very long time." She exhaled. "Now I know why." "Professor," Harry said, "what did Dumbledore say when you told him?" A pause that was so small it was almost invisible. "I haven't spoken to Albus yet." "You came here first." "I came here first." The fact of that hung in the air and said several things that McGonagall was not going to say directly because direct was not her style, and also because she was not yet sure of all of them herself. "I appreciate that," Harry said. "Don't thank me yet," she said briskly, which was more like her. "What is your plan?" "We're working on it," Hermione said, gesturing at the notes. McGonagall looked at Hermione's notes. She pulled them closer, read for approximately 90 seconds, and then began reorganizing them with the focused authority of a woman who had been teaching strategy and precision for 30 years. "Your legal framework is sound but incomplete," she said to Hermione, who did not look offended. She looked, frankly, relieved to have another brain. "The Compact's sovereignty provision requires public invocation before a recognized magical gathering. The Wisengamot qualifies but carries political risk given current membership. There is, however, a second option." She looked at Harry. "Hogwarts itself." "The castle," Harry said. "The castle. Under the Compact, any gathering of magical people on the castle grounds constitutes a legitimate assembly for the purposes of sovereignty recognition. This means, if you wanted to establish the title without handing the ministry control over the process, you could do it at Hogwarts. On your terms." "September 1st, Sirius said. "The start of term." "Yes. That was my thought." Harry looked at the table, at the ledger and Hermione's notes and McGonagall's reorganized editions, and he thought about timing. About what September 1st would mean. About the weeks between now and then, and what could happen in those weeks, and what he could use that time for. "There are things I need to do first," he said. "Before September. Before any public invocation." He looked at McGonagall. "I need access to the restricted section at Hogwarts. Not a permission slip. I need full access, and I need it now, not September." "The castle will let you in," McGonagall said, and she said it with complete certainty. "If what the ledger says is accurate, the castle has already been trying to reach you. It will not deny you entry." "I know. I felt it this morning." He paused. "I also need someone on the inside. At the school. Someone who can start, quietly, understanding who on the staff is genuinely loyal to the school itself rather than to any particular person or institution." McGonagall looked at him steadily. "You're asking me to do intelligence work." "I'm asking you to do what you've been doing for 30 years, he said, calm and direct, which is to know exactly who in that building can be trusted and who is operating an agenda. I'm just asking you to be explicit about it now." A beat of silence. Then something moved through her expression, rapid, private, conclusive, and she straightened her already straight robes. "I can do that," she said. "Thank you." He meant it simply and she received it simply, which was how they'd always communicated best. The afternoon moved. More tea. McGonagall and Hermione locked into detailed discussion about the compact's precise legal language, two exceptional minds working in total synchronization with the specific focused pleasure of people solving a problem that actually matters. Sirius drafted and redrafted the notification list, crossing names off and moving them to different columns with the thoughtful precision of a former marauder who understood that how you told people things was as important as what you told them. Harry watched, and contributed, and thought. He was thinking about Dumbledore. Not with anger, not yet, and maybe not ever, because anger was the easy version and the truth was more complicated than anger allowed for. He was thinking about Dumbledore the way you think about a very complex chess problem. Acknowledging the pieces. Understanding the moves. Not flinching from the implications. Dumbledore was brilliant. Dumbledore was, Harry believed, genuinely good in the large sense, genuinely committed to opposing Voldemort, genuinely caring about the wizarding world's well-being. And Dumbledore had known something about Harry's inheritance. Harry was certain of it now, with the Slytherin sharp certainty that was one of the four qualities he was still getting used to. The concealment on Lily's bloodline was too careful, too precise, too specifically targeted for Dumbledore not to have encountered its edges at some point in 35 years of extraordinary magical perception. What he didn't know was whether Dumbledore had cast the concealment, or discovered it and said nothing, or genuinely missed it. The versions of that answer led to very different conversations. He was still turning it over when the afternoon shattered. The knock at the front door was 3 sharp raps, the kind that comes from the handle of a wand rather than a knuckle, and it was followed immediately by the distinct sound of Ministry-issue ward detection equipment going active outside, a high, thin whine that Harry recognized from the summer before 5th year, when Ministry owls had crashed through the kitchen window with disciplinary hearings attached. Everyone at the table went still. "They were faster than I expected," Sirius said. "How did they find the address?" Hermione said. "It's the Fidelius," Sirius said, already moving. "They can't actually get in. They're standing at the ward boundary." "They know someone is home," McGonagall said. She hadn't moved and she had the calm of a woman who had faced down scarier things than Ministry officials. "They'll wait." Harry stood up. He picked up the blood ledger. He looked at the front of the house with the new, specific sensitivity he'd had since the ritual, the sensitivity that read magical structures the way a musician reads sound, not seeing them exactly, but feeling their shape, their age, their intent. The Fidelius was there, deep and solid. Outside it, the Ministry ward detection equipment was active, and behind it were 3 magical signatures, human and Ministry standard N, one of them was senior. High level. That particular density of official enchantments that accompanied aura department heads or ministerial representatives. "I'll talk to them," Harry said. "Harry," Sirius started. "They can't come in. I'll go to the ward boundary." He looked at Sirius. "They can't do anything to me outside the Fidelius. And I'd rather know what they're doing than wonder about it while they stand on the pavement." Sirius looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who wanted to object on protective grounds and recognized that the person in front of him had, sometime in the last 6 hours, moved past the point where protective objection was the appropriate response. "I'll be right behind you," he said. Harry walked to the front door and opened it. The street was ordinary and quiet, afternoon sunlight on old London stone. 3 wizards stood at the ward boundary, 2 younger, in aura robes, and 1 central figure who was not in aura robes but in the formal deep blue of a Ministry senior official. He was perhaps 50, with a thin face and an expression of controlled authority that Harry recognized as the face of a man accustomed to having rooms rearrange themselves around his arrival. Thaddeus Rook. Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic, Special Regulatory Division. Harry didn't know the name yet. He'd learn it later. In this moment he only knew the feel of the man, smooth and certain and performing confidence with the slight overemphasis of someone who'd learned confidence as a skill rather than grown into it. "Harry Potter," the man said. He smiled. It was a very good smile. "My name is Thaddeus Rook. I'm with the Ministry's Special Regulatory Division." I wonder if we might have a word. Harry looked at him across the ward boundary. He didn't open the boundary. He just looked at him, and took his time about it. About what? Harry said. There's been a significant magical event registered this morning, Rook said pleasantly. An activation in the Gringotts Heritage Chamber that sent a signal across every ministry monitoring ward in the country. Our instruments are, quite excited. The pleasant smile held with professional ease. We'd simply like to understand what occurred. For regulatory purposes. Then I'd suggest filing an inquiry with Gringotts, Harry said. Heritage rituals are confidential under the goblin autonomy provisions of 1765. A brief pause. The smile didn't move, but something behind it did. That's quite right, of course. However, if the magical event in question relates to certain historical legal provisions, the ministry would have a legitimate interest in. I'm 16, Harry said pleasantly. I'd need my guardian present for any formal ministry interview. My guardian is a free man, fully cleared by the Wisengamot, and he can arrange a formal meeting at a mutually convenient time, through the proper channels, with appropriate documentation from both sides. He paused. Was there something else? The smooth certainty on Rook's face had developed a small crack, and Harry watched it appear with the Ravenclaw clarity that saw the exact shape of it. This was a man who had expected a 16-year-old boy. Possibly nervous, possibly eager to explain, possibly grateful for official interest. He was recalibrating. Mr. Potter, Rook said, and the pleasantness was still there but the warmth was gone from it. I want to be helpful here. If what occurred this morning is what our instruments suggest, certain very old legal provisions become relevant, and it would be in everyone's interest to approach this collaboratively, with the ministry's support and guidance. The ministry's support and guidance, Harry said, in a tone of perfectly pleasant repetition, would be considered at the appropriate time, through the appropriate channels. Thank you for coming by, Mr. Rook. He stepped back inside and closed the door. Sirius was standing in the hallway. He was making an expression Harry had never quite seen on him before, surprised and delighted and slightly overcome, all at once. That, Sirius said, was your father. Your father just did that through your face. Was I rude? Harry asked, genuinely checking. Technically impeccable, Sirius said. Devastatingly firm. Your father once did something almost identical to a Slytherin prefect in 5th year and I nearly cried. From the kitchen, Hermione called, "What happened? What did they want?" Harry walked back to the kitchen. Exactly what we thought. Confirm and contain. Get ahead of it before we can establish our own terms. He sat down. How much time do we have before they figure out a legal angle to force a formal interview? Without your cooperation. Weeks, at minimum, Hermione said. The goblin autonomy provisions genuinely do protect heritage ritual outcomes. And the fidelius means they can't obtain a premises warrant without proving cause, which requires evidence of a crime, which they don't have. She looked at him with something close to admiration. You knew that before you went out there. I knew enough of it, Harry said. The rest I bluffed. McGonagall made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of someone who does not laugh easily finding something genuinely funny. What we need, Harry said, is to move first. Before the ministry constructs their framework around this, before Dumbledore decides how he wants to present it, before Voldemort figures out what it means and reacts. He looked around the table. I need to go to Hogwarts. It's summer, Sirius said. The castle will let me in. McGonagall said so. He looked at her. Did you mean that? I did, she said. Then let's go tomorrow morning. I want to be in the castle before anyone starts making decisions about what I should know and when I should know it. He paused. And I want to talk to Dumbledore on my own ground, with my own information, before he talks to me on his. McGonagall looked at him across the table with the expression of a woman reassessing something fundamental. What? He said. Nothing, she said. I was simply thinking that the Sorting Hat debated for 8 minutes over you. I know. It wanted Slytherin. I know. I was present. She folded her hands. I always thought the hat made the right choice in the end. Now I rather think it simply chose which quality to lead with. She stood, straightening her robes. I'll return to Hogwarts tonight and ensure the castle is aware of your coming. She said aware with the slightest hint of self-consciousness, because it was a strange thing to say about a building. Albus is there. He'll sense the castle's response to your approach before you arrive. Good, Harry said. I'd prefer he had time to think. She looked at him once more, and then she went to the fireplace and was gone in a flash of green. Sirius sat back in his chair and exhaled through his nose, long and slow. Hermione was already making new notes. The blood ledger sat at the center of the table, warm and certain and permanent. Outside Grimmauld Place, the afternoon was golden and unremarkable. Somewhere in the city, Thaddeus Rook was getting back into a ministry vehicle and making urgent fireplace calls. Somewhere in Scotland, a castle was humming quietly to itself, and turning its attention south with the patience of something that had been waiting 7 centuries and could wait one more night without difficulty. Harry picked up the ledger and held it, and felt the 4 strands of inherited magic move through him like currents in deep water, distinct and recognizable and his, undeniably and completely his, and the pulling sensation that had woken him this morning had resolved entirely into something that was not a pull at all. It was direction. It was the deep, settled certainty of knowing which way was north. He knew where he was going. He knew what he was doing. He was going home. Chapter 3, The Court of the Eternal King. The Hogwarts Express didn't run in summer, so they took the Fleur to Hogsmeade at 7 in the morning and walked. It was Harry, Hermione, and Sirius, moving through the early mist on the road from the village with their breath making small clouds in the Highland air. The mountains were green-grey and enormous. The lake was silver. The castle sat above it all the way it always sat, massive and certain and permanent, towers catching the early light, windows lit gold from within against the pale sky. Harry had walked this road dozens of times. He knew the exact point where the castle came into full view around a bend in the path, and he'd always felt something at that moment, the particular feeling of arriving at a place that mattered. But this morning the feeling was different. Not bigger, exactly. More, mutual. Less like arriving somewhere and more like being recognized by somewhere. He felt the castle before he saw it clearly. That same resonant warmth from the day before, the deep note played on a foundational instrument, but closer now, immediate, and much more specific. For distinct qualities woven into the castle's magic the way 4 threads are woven into a rope, he could feel each one separately if he paid attention, and together they were something that matched what was moving through his own blood with such precise correspondence that the path between them was less bridge and more mirror. The wards just changed, Hermione said quietly. She was walking half a step behind him, watching the castle with the expression of someone monitoring instruments. Can you feel that? The perimeter wards. They just shifted. They're opening, Harry said. Hogwarts has never voluntarily opened its perimeter wards, she said. She paused. That I know of. It has now. Sirius said nothing. He was watching Harry with the careful attention of a man who wanted to be useful and was wise enough to understand that useful, in this moment, meant present and quiet. They reached the main gates. The iron was old and cold under the mist, worked with the same interlocking rune patterns Harry had seen in the walls of the Gringotts heritage chamber, the same patterns that moved, slowly, like deep water. He placed his hand on the gate and the iron was warm. Not metal warm from the sun, which had barely cleared the mountains. Warm from within. The gates opened without a sound. They walked up to the castle doors, and those opened too, and what met them in the entrance hall was not McGonagall, though Harry had half expected her. The entrance hall was empty of people, enormous and echoing in the morning quiet, the house hourglasses dark without students to fill them. The enchanted ceiling above the great hall was still doing weather, low morning cloud, patches of pale gold, and the whole place had the particular quality of emptiness that felt less like absence and more like held breath. And then every torch in the entrance hall lit simultaneously. Not gradually, not one by one, but all at once, blazing warm gold, and the quality of the light was like the light from the Gringotts basin, all four colors present in it, braided together into something that looked like ordinary torchlight but felt like a welcome that was 700 years in the making. Hermione made a sound somewhere between a word and a gasp. Sirius put his hand briefly over his mouth. "All right," Harry said softly, "to the castle." Not self-consciously, it felt no stranger than speaking to someone standing in a room. "All right. I'm here." The warmth in the walls pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and settled. Footsteps on the marble staircase. Measured, deliberate, unhurried, the footsteps of a man who had decided on the way down exactly how he was going to enter this conversation and was committed to his choice. Albus Dumbledore came down the grand staircase with his silver-blue robes moving around him and his half-moon spectacles catching the torchlight, and his expression was the most honest Harry had ever seen it. Not warm and distant, which was how Dumbledore usually looked at him. Not the calculating warmth of a man who cared about him and was also managing him simultaneously, which Harry had only recently found language for. This was, stripped. As if the night between McGonagall's return and this morning had been spent discarding several layers of careful construction, and what remained was a very old man looking at a 16-year-old boy and not quite knowing what to say. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Harry stopped in the middle of the entrance hall. There was about 15 feet of marble between them, and both of them seemed aware that the distance was exactly right for this particular conversation. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor," Harry said. A pause. Dumbledore looked at him the way you look at something you knew well and are now seeing clearly for the first time, adjusting for every previous assumption simultaneously. Harry watched him do it and felt no impatience about it. He had his own adjustments to make. He was making them. "Minerva told me," Dumbledore said. "Last night. The full account of what occurred at Gringotts. All of it. All of it. A breath. She was quite thorough." "Good." Harry paused. "Did you know?" Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that the answer was already yes before he spoke. "I knew pieces," he said. "I knew the Potter bloodline carried Gryffindor descent. I had long suspected it. I knew the Founder's Compact existed and had never been activated." He paused. "I did not know about your mother's lineage. I have spent the night considering whether this is because I failed to look carefully enough, or because I looked and was prevented from seeing, and I cannot yet be certain which." "Someone hid it," Harry said. "Deliberately. 35 years ago." "I know. And you don't know who." "I have," Dumbledore paused very carefully. "I have a hypothesis I am not yet prepared to state, because stating it without certainty would be irresponsible." Harry looked at him with the Slytherin clarity that read the exact texture of that sentence. Not yet prepared to state was not the same as don't know. And Dumbledore knew that Harry would read that distinction, and he'd chosen those words anyway, which meant he was being more honest than he usually was, which was itself a form of acknowledgement. "Then when you have certainty," Harry said, "we'll have that conversation. And we'll have it completely." He held Dumbledore's gaze steadily. "I'm not angry at you. I want to be clear about that. But I'm also not going to let you manage this the way you've managed everything else. I need you to understand that." Dumbledore looked at him. Something moved across his face that might, in another context, have been called humility. "I do understand that," he said quietly. "More than I expected to, I find. I need access to the full Hogwarts archive. The restricted section without limitations. The Founder's records that the castle keeps. There are records, aren't there? Original documents. The actual compact, not copies of copies." "There are," Dumbledore said. "In the Chamber of Foundation. Below the dungeons. I will not pretend that I had forgotten it existed, because that would insult both of us. I will tell you honestly that I chose not to engage with it because engaging with it would have required acknowledging possibilities I was not, a pause, ready to examine. Where is it? I'll show you. Harry looked at him for one more moment, measuring, and then nodded. Sirius stepped up beside Harry and looked at Dumbledore with a long, old, complicated look that contained 12 years of imprisonment and everything that came before and after it. Dumbledore looked back at him with an expression that said, plainly, that this particular reckoning was also overdue and he was not running from it. Sirius, he said. Albus, Sirius said. And left it there, for now, because there was a more pressing order of business. They followed Dumbledore into the castle. The Chamber of Foundation was not on the Marauder's map. Harry had a copy in his bag and he checked it on the way down, following Dumbledore through a passage behind a tapestry on the 4th floor that descended steadily through what felt like the geological history of the building, older stone the further down they went, rougher and darker and denser with age, until the walls were not stone blocks but raw cliff face. The mountain the castle stood on exposed and unworked, older than anything human hands had built. The chamber itself was a natural cave, roughly circular, perhaps 30 feet across. The ceiling was low. In the center was a table, four-sided, not round, and each side was carved from a different stone. Red sandstone. White limestone. Black basalt. Gray granite. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Hufflepuff. Harry knew the associations without being told. On the table was a single document. Not copies, not transcriptions. The original Founders' Compact, written in 4 different hands in 4 different inks on a single piece of parchment that looked like it should have crumbled centuries ago and hadn't, because the magic sealed into it was the kind of magic that didn't require maintenance. The kind that simply was. The castle has maintained this chamber for 700 years, Dumbledore said quietly. No headmaster has been able to access it fully. We can enter and observe, but the documents cannot be removed, and certain areas of the chamber respond only to, he gestured, indicating the obvious. Harry walked to the table. He stood before the compact and read it, not in English, it was in archaic Latin and the Founder's own runic shorthand, but the words were not entirely necessary because the magic in the document recognized him and offered itself to be understood the way a guide offers a hand to someone finding their footing. He felt the meaning of it move through him, not like reading but like remembering. The compact was not what he'd expected. He'd expected authority, proclamations, laws, structures of governance. And those things were there, but they weren't the heart of it. The heart of it was a different word entirely. The word the Founders had used, over and over, in every section, was custodian. Not king, not sovereign, not ruler. Custodian. Rex Perpetuus Magici, eternal king of magic, was a translation that had lost something crucial. The original word was closer to eternal keeper. The one who holds the magic of this land in trust for every magical being within it. Not the master of magic but its anchor. Its living instrument. They didn't want a ruler, Harry said. He was still looking at the compact. They wanted someone who could prevent what they saw happening after they were gone. Fragmentation. Political factions claiming magic as their property. The Ministry, essentially. They saw it coming. Yes, Dumbledore said. They saw it very clearly. A pause. The title was never meant to be a tool of personal power. Which is why it sealed itself against anyone who sought it. It can only be inherited, Harry said. Not claimed. Not earned by ambition. Precisely. The blood must carry all 4 lines genuinely. Which means, Dumbledore paused, and Harry heard the weight in the pause, and let it exist without filling it. Which means it could not have been engineered. No manipulation of bloodlines could have produced it. Only genuine, unplanned descent across centuries. But it could be prevented, Harry said, turning. That's what someone tried to do. Yes, Dumbledore said, and his voice was very quiet. That is what someone tried to do. The cave was silent for a moment except for the deep, slow sound of the castle breathing, actual sound, not metaphor, a low resonant pulse in the stone walls that Harry had been feeling since they walked in, and that was, he was increasingly certain, the closest thing the building had to a heartbeat. "I want to spend some time here," Harry said. "Alone?" Dumbledore nodded immediately. No hesitation, no management. "Of course." He moved toward the exit, then paused. "Harry. Whatever you find in this chamber, whatever the compact shows you, I want you to know that I will support what you choose to do with it. Fully and without condition." He paused once more. "I should have said something very like that several years ago. I am aware of that." He left. Sirius looked at Harry, a question in his eyebrows. "Give me an hour," Harry said. Sirius nodded and followed Dumbledore, and Harry was alone in the Chamber of Foundation with the Founder's Compact and the Mountain's Heartbeat and the 4 qualities of inherited magic flowing through him like rivers that had found their confluence. He sat down on the floor, there were no chairs, and the floor was smooth, worn by centuries of the castle's magic rather than by feet, and placed his hands flat on the stone. And he opened himself to it. Not performing anything. Not trying. Just, present, and willing. The castle came. Not gently, thoroughly. The whole of it, from the dungeons to the highest tower, 7 centuries of accumulated magic and memory and the living presence of every person who had ever passed through it, all of it moving through Harry simultaneously the way the whole of a river moves through a single deep pool. Students and teachers and ghosts and arguments and triumphs and losses and ordinary Tuesday evenings and extraordinary midnight hours. The magic of the place was the distilled, living record of everything it had held. And underneath all of it, older than the students and the teachers and even the ghosts, the 4 original signatures. Gryffindor, burning bright. Ravenclaw, crystalline. Hufflepuff, deep-rooted. Slytherin, still and profound. Not gone. Not historical. Present in the stones the way water is present in rock, entered into the substance of it so completely that separation was no longer meaningful. Harry sat in the cave for 1 hour. He didn't move. The torches on the walls burned the 4-color light, and the stone was warm under his hands, and by the time he stood up again he understood several things he hadn't understood before. He understood what the compact actually required of him. He understood what the 4 founders had built and why. And he understood, with a clarity that was not joyful and not frightening but simply, precisely, true, that the war he'd been living in since he was an infant was not, at its root, a war between good and evil in any simple sense. It was a war about ownership. About who got to decide what magic was for. About who got to define its boundaries and control its application and determine whose magical lives were legitimate. Voldemort's answer was pure blood. The Ministry's answer was bureaucratic control. The answer that the founders had built into the compact's foundation was something older than either and more difficult than both. Magic belonged to itself. And the Rex Perpetuus was the person who stood between magic and everyone who wanted to own it. Harry walked out of the Chamber of Foundation and up through the mountain stone and into the castle's corridors, and the torches lit ahead of him as he walked. The teachers arrived gradually through the morning, drawn back to Hogwarts by McGonagall's careful, selective flu messages the night before. Not all of them, she'd been precise about who. Flitwick came first, at 10, bouncing with energy in attempting to conceal it with professional dignity in failing entirely. Sprout came at 11, direct from her greenhouse somewhere in Wales, still with soil on her hands, with the expression of someone who had been told something astonishing over breakfast and had thought of nothing else since. They gathered in the staff room, which felt strange with so few people, just these 4 teachers, and Harry, and Sirius, and Hermione who was the only non-teacher in the room and was managing not to look pleased about it only by focusing on her notes. Dumbledore sat at the table's head, but he was not, Harry noticed, running the meeting. He was present and attentive, but he kept his hands folded and his comments minimal, allowing the shape of the room to organize itself around Harry naturally, which was the most respectful thing he'd done yet. Harry showed them the blood ledger. He explained, straight, direct, no dramatic build-up, what the heritage ritual had revealed, what the compact said, and what he intended. He watched their faces as he spoke. Flitwick moved through surprise, professional assessment, historical excitement, and landed on a kind of fierce, clear-eyed delight. Sprout listened with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea and her expression doing the slow, gathering work of someone building a structure that will hold. September 1st, McGonagall said, when Harry had finished. The start of term. Full assembly in the Great Hall. That's the plan. That's the plan, Harry confirmed. I want the invocation on record before the Ministry can construct a framework for containing it. Once the compact is publicly activated in the presence of a legitimate magical assembly, its sovereignty provisions are legally binding under magical law that predates everything the Ministry operates on. And Voldemort? Flitwick asked. He said the name with the careful deliberateness of someone who had trained themselves to say it without flinching. Voldemort is a separate conversation, Harry said. But a related one. How so? The compact's sovereignty covers protection of all magical beings in Britain. That explicitly includes an obligation to address threats to magical life and freedom. Voldemort's campaign is, Harry paused, choosing precision. It's not just political. It's existential. The Rex Perpetuus has not just the authority but the specific obligation under the compact to resolve it. You're saying the title gives you both the legal standing and the mandate to end this war, Hermione said, making sure the logic was explicit. Yes, Harry said. On our terms. Not the Ministry's timetable. Not Dumbledore's strategy. Our terms. He said our deliberately and felt the room respond to it, not just Hermione and Sirius but the teachers, all four of them, something settling into place in the room the way stone settles when weight is distributed correctly. The Wizengamot won't accept it quietly, Sprout said. Pragmatic, direct, that was Sprout. There are members who've spent 30 years building power under the current structure. This threatens all of it. I know, Harry said. Lucius Malfoy specifically. A beat of quiet. Malfoy has been positioning himself for this kind of power shift for years, Sirius said. If the compact activates and someone doesn't move to contain the title immediately, Malfoy will. He has enough Wizengamot votes to attempt to bind the sovereign authority through emergency legislation, argue that the title is obsolete under modern magical law, and probably make a reasonable legal case for it to people who don't know the compact's actual provisions. He'd move fast, McGonagall said. He'd move before September 1st, Sirius said. If he knows. And he will know. Then we have to move faster, Harry said simply. What does that mean specifically? Flitwick asked. It means I'm not going back to Grimmauld Place to wait, Harry said. I'm staying here. At Hogwarts. Now, through the summer and into September. The castle is the seat of sovereign authority under the compact, being here establishes presence and precedent. He paused. And while I'm here, I'm going to understand every resource the compact gives me before anyone else decides to challenge it. Dumbledore spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. The castle has rooms in the North Tower that haven't been used since, he paused. Since the Founder's time, actually. They were built as private apartments for the Rex Perpetuus. He said it with the steady, slightly painful tone of a man acknowledging a structure he'd known about and not addressed. They will have been waiting. Of course they have, Sirius said, somewhere between dry and resigned. Will the rest of you stay? Harry asked the teachers. He asked it simply, without pressure. It was a genuine question, not a command. Flitwick said yes before Harry finished the sentence, which was both touching and funny. Sprout nodded with the deliberate certainty of a woman who grows things and understands that commitment is how roots form. McGonagall said nothing, because her having flood McGonagall 4 times in 24 hours and reorganized everything in Hermione's notes made the answer self-evident. There is one more thing, Harry said, and his voice shifted slightly, still calm, still direct, but with something underneath it that was new. Not heavier. More deliberate. Before September. Before the Wiesengemot. I need to have a conversation with Voldemort. The room's temperature did not drop, but it felt as though it did. Absolutely not, Sirius said. I'm not asking your permission, Harry said. He said it without heat, without apology, and with the full understanding of what he was communicating, not dismissal, but a fundamental statement about what had changed. He looked at his godfather with complete honesty. I'm telling you, because you deserve to know, and I want your input on how. But the decision is made. Sirius stared at him. Then, slowly, the objection in his face transformed into something more complicated and more honest. James would have done exactly this, he said. I know. That's not necessarily a compliment. I know that too. What do you think he'll do? Hermione asked. She was asking practically, analytically, which was her version of support. He'll want to understand what I am, Harry said. Voldemort is many things, but he is not stupid, and he is ideologically coherent. When he understands the compact, and he will understand it, he has the historical knowledge, the Parseltongue, the founder descent, he won't simply attack. He'll want to negotiate. He'll think that the King of Magic aligning with him would be the end of all opposition. And you'll say no, Hermione said. I'll say no, Harry agreed. But I want to look him in the eye when I do. I want him to understand exactly what I am, and exactly what that means for him, before we reach the endgame. He paused. And I want to know who sent him after my parents. Because I think he knows, and I think he'll tell me, if I ask correctly. The room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere in the castle corridors, a ghost drifted past a window, a glimmer of silver-gray movement, there and gone. The enchanted ceiling in the great hall next door had shifted to clear blue. A September sky projected in July. Fitting, Harry thought. He found the North Tower apartments that afternoon, not because Dumbledore directed him there but because the castle did, a route that wasn't possible by any map he knew, through a corridor that he could have sworn hadn't existed this morning, and up a staircase that moved not in the random rotation of the other staircases but deliberately, purposefully, carrying him upward as if the castle had decided the scenic route was over. The door at the top was oak, dark with age, carved with the same four-color rune patterns he was becoming familiar with. It opened before he touched it. Inside was, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. Something archaic. Dusty grandeur. But the rooms were warm and clean in the particular, inexplicable way of things that magic maintains without instruction, because they matter. A main room with a fireplace already lit, a desk, bookshelves that were not empty, lined with texts that were not Hogwarts library standard texts but something older, private, personal. A bedroom. A window that faced north over the mountains with a view that was, objectively, the finest thing Harry had ever seen outside of a Quidditch pitch in full light. On the desk was a piece of parchment with writing on it. Not from this century. The ink was brown with age, the handwriting four distinct styles merged into a single message the way four voices might sing the same line together. Harry picked it up. He couldn't read the archaic Latin perfectly, but the castle helped again, the understanding flowing in the same way as before. To the one who carries what we built, this place was made for you, though we did not know you yet. What you hold is not ours to give and not yours to take. It is yours to tend. The magic of this land has always known the difference between a keeper and a conqueror. So has the land itself. Welcome home. Below that, signed in four separate hands. Godric. Rowena. Helga. Salazar. Not formal. Just names, the way friends sign their names. Harry sat down at the desk and held the parchment for a while. Outside the window the mountains were enormous and patient and old. Hermione knocked and entered 20 minutes later with a stack of new notes and the expression of someone who has had a productive afternoon and wants to compare findings. She took in the room, the parchment, Harry's expression, and sat across from him without commentary. The legal timetable, she said, placing her notes on the desk. We have approximately 3 weeks before the ministry can establish a formal inquiry that requires a response. Lucius Malfoy's next Wisengamot session is in 10 days. Ragnarok sent a follow-up message to Sirius this afternoon. Gringotts will formally recognize the compact activation in their public records tomorrow morning, which means it becomes a matter of magical legal record regardless of whether the ministry acknowledges it. Good, Harry said. There's more. She hesitated for a half-second, which from Hermione was the equivalent of a long dramatic pause. There was a letter at the Grimmauld Place fireplace when Sirius checked in an hour ago. Addressed to you. No return address. Sealed in green wax with a mark that Sirius says he's seen before. Voldemort, Harry said. Voldemort. She placed the letter on the desk. It was exactly as described, green wax, a mark that was not the dark mark but something older, a serpent in a different configuration. Sirius hasn't opened it. He was very calm about it, which worried me more than if he'd been angry. Harry picked it up. He turned it over. The seal was old magic, preservation charm. Whatever was written inside was meant to last. How do you think he knows already? Hermione asked. Because Voldemort has spies in the ministry and probably in Gringotts, Harry said. And because whatever monitoring he had on me, the connection from the scar, probably registered the ritual the same way the ministry wards did. He paused. Or he simply felt the magic change. The way the alley wards felt it. The way the castle felt it. He looked at the letter. He'd know what it meant. He has Slytherin's bloodline knowledge. Harry. She looked at him with her most direct, honest expression, the one she reserved for moments when she was going to say something important and wanted it to land properly. Whatever is in that letter, whatever he wants, I know you've decided to talk to him. I think it's the right call. I want you to know I'm with you. Whatever happens. He looked at her, at this girl who had been standing next to him since they were 11, who had at various points saved his life, corrected his Latin, and dragged him back from despair through sheer force of determined love, who had built a legal framework for his kingship on a kitchen table on his birthday morning with the same focused care she gave everything she loved. I know, he said. Thank you. She nodded. Businesslike again immediately, because she was Hermione. Open the letter. He broke the seal. The handwriting inside was precise and cold and perfectly formed, the writing of someone for whom penmanship had been a mechanism of control long before it was anything else. Harry read it and said nothing for a moment, and then he put it flat on the desk where Hermione could read it. She read it. Her eyes moved fast and her expression shifted and settled. The letter said, in its entirety, I am aware of what you are. I believe we have more to discuss than either of us has acknowledged. I propose a meeting at a time and location of your choosing, under magical truce protocol, without seconds or witnesses except those you deem necessary. I believe we may understand each other better than either of us expects. Come with the authority you have been given, or do not come at all. I have no interest in speaking to a boy. I have great interest in speaking to a king. TMR. Harry looked at Hermione. She looked back at him. He's afraid, she said. Yes, Harry said. Not of me specifically. Of what I represent. He picked up the letter again. Come with the authority you have been given. He's already working out whether he can co-opt this. He thinks there's a negotiation to be had, she said. There isn't, Harry said. But I want him to explain to me why he thinks there is. He looked at her steadily. And then I want to make absolutely certain he understands that there isn't. He set the letter aside and looked out the window at the mountains. The sun was getting low, the peaks turning gold and shadow. The castle hummed its deep, slow note around him, and outside the window, somewhere high in the mountain air, something that might have been an eagle and might have been something else entirely caught the updraft and turned, glinting gold and dark, and was gone. 3 weeks. 3 weeks before the ministry made its move, Lucius Malfoy began his, and September arrived with its full assembly and its public reckoning. 3 weeks to understand everything the compact was, to prepare every legal instrument Hermione was building, to visit Voldemort and come back from it with the specific knowledge he needed. 3 weeks was enough. He picked up his quill and began drafting a reply. Chapter 4, Blood and Negotiation. Harry sent his reply to Voldemort on a Tuesday. By Thursday morning, he had a response. The location Voldemort proposed was a place called Knightswood, a stretch of ancient forest in the Scottish lowlands that predated the Ministry of Magic, predated recorded wizarding history in Britain, and sat on a confluence of ley lines so old that the trees had grown around the magical current over centuries and incorporated it into their root systems. The forest itself was a recognized neutral ground under magical law going back to the 11th century, which was, Harry reflected, exactly the kind of detail Voldemort would cite to demonstrate that he'd done his homework. Harry wrote back, Saturday. Noon. 4 witnesses each. Magical truce protocol active from the moment either party enters the tree line. Voldemort wrote back in 2 hours, agreed. Sirius spent Friday in a state of controlled agitation that expressed itself as excessive tea-making and very thorough wand maintenance. He sharpened nothing because wands didn't require sharpening, but Harry suspected if there had been anything in the house that needed sharpening he would have found it and done it methodically for several hours. Hermione spent Friday in the Chamber of Foundation with a quick quotes quill and a stack of parchment, extracting every relevant section of the compact with the focused intensity of someone building the most important legal brief of their life. McGonagall spent Friday doing something she described as administrative preparation and which Harry suspected involved very precise assessments of which staff members were going to be a problem in September. Harry spent Friday in the North Tower. Not studying. Not preparing in any strategic sense. Just, present. Sitting at the desk with his hands flat on the wood and feeling the castle move around him, its deep pulse a constant now, familiar as breathing. He'd spent a week in the Founder's apartments and what had surprised him most was not the access to ancient knowledge or the extraordinary view from the window or even the slow, steady growth of his own magical understanding. What had surprised him was how quiet it was. How settled. The 4 qualities of inherited magic had stopped feeling like separate rivers and started feeling like his own bloodstream, Gryffindor's courage that was not recklessness but clarity under pressure, Ravenclaw's precision that was not coldness but the ability to see the shape of a thing truly, Hufflepuff's patience that was not passivity but the deep certainty that some things must be allowed to grow rather than forced, and Slytherin's awareness that was not cruelty but the honest recognition of how power moved and where it lived. He wasn't performing any of it. That was the thing he kept coming back to. It wasn't a skill he was acquiring. It was a language he was remembering. Ron arrived on Friday evening by Flo with a rucksack over one shoulder and a slightly wary expression that Harry recognized as the face of someone who had spent a week being told significant things and was now confronting the significance directly. He came through the fireplace in the staff room, where Harry was sitting with Sirius and Hermione, and he stood in the middle of the room and looked at Harry with his best friend's honest, careful eyes. "All right," he said. "Mom told me not to come. Dad told me to use my judgment. I used my judgment. I'm glad you're here," Harry said. Ron nodded slowly, looking around the staff room, at the summer quiet castle, at Hermione's towering notes, at Sirius's expression of someone who has been through a great deal in the past week. He dropped his bag. He sat down. "Tell me everything," he said. "Properly. From the start." So Harry told him. All of it. The ritual, the ledger, the compact, the letter, the meeting tomorrow. He told it straight, without drama, the way he'd been telling things all week, clearly, directly, with the calm of someone who had processed it and was now on the far side of the processing. And he watched Ron's face move through surprise and astonishment and a long, complicated moment when Harry got to the part about what the title actually meant, and he watched what happened in his best friend's expression during that moment very carefully. There it was. Briefly. That old thing, the shadow of something that Ron had carried since first year, that they'd never quite named, that lived in the gap between best friend of Harry Potter and Ronald Weasley, who is also a person. Harry had always known it was there. Ron had always known that Harry knew. The thing had the decency to be brief. Eternal King of Magic, Ron said. Yeah, Harry said. And you're just, Ron gestured at him. You. Sitting here. Being that. Still me, yeah. Ron thought about it. Does it come with better Quidditch instincts? Harry laughed, a real laugh, sudden and genuine. I haven't tested that yet. Because that would actually be useful. Ron picked up one of Hermione's notes and looked at it without reading it, a habit he had. You're going to see Voldemort tomorrow. Yes. And you're not worried? No. Ron looked at him for a long moment. Then he set down the note and picked up Hermione's spare quill and turned it over in his fingers, and what settled onto his face was something clear and decided and entirely Ron, the particular expression of someone who has moved past a complicated feeling by acknowledging it honestly and choosing what comes next. Right, he said. Then I'm coming with you. Hermione looked up. You've been here 20 minutes. I have excellent instincts, Ron said. Harry looked at him. 4 witnesses each. You'd be one of them. Then I'll be one of them. Ron met his eyes with complete directness. You're not walking into a magical truce meeting with Voldemort without me there. That's not how this works. Okay, Harry said. Just like that. I was going to ask you, Harry said. You saved me the trouble. Ron absorbed this. Then, because he was Ron and the moment was getting more sincere than was comfortable, right? Is there food? I fled straight from the burrow and Mum was stress cooking when I left, so I barely got away with half a sandwich. Knightswood in early morning was extraordinary in the specific, indifferent way that very old things are extraordinary, not performing beauty but simply being what they were, which happened to be magnificent. The trees were enormous, their canopies so thick that the light came through in vertical shafts like columns in a cathedral. The ley lines were perceptible even without special sensitivity, a warmth in the ground, a slight thickening of the air, a quality of there-ness that meant standing in this forest felt more real than standing almost anywhere else. Harry arrived with 4, Sirius, Hermione, Ron, and McGonagall, who had made clear that her presence was not optional and who was wearing traveling robes in the particular severe way that meant she was prepared for anything. They entered the tree line at noon exactly and activated the truce. The truce protocol was old magic, a form of magical contract that bound both parties against hostile action for the duration of the meeting, with consequences for violation that were embedded in the ley lines themselves. You didn't need to sign anything. You entered the designated area and the magic recognized your presence and the agreement was instantaneous and binding. Harry felt it settle over him like a layer of still air, not restrictive, just, acknowledged. A rule that the world itself was enforcing. They moved through the trees for 5 minutes before Harry saw them. Voldemort came with 4 as well. 2 Death Eaters in robes that were probably meant to look imposing, they looked, Harry thought, like people trying to look imposing, which was different. A 3rd figure who was cloaked and whose magical signature Harry didn't recognize but was extraordinary, old and specific in a way that demanded attention. And Voldemort himself. Harry had seen Voldemort twice, in the graveyard, during the Ministry battle. Both times at a distance and in the specific context of crisis, of survival, of the adrenaline that narrowed the world to immediate threat. This was different. This was open ground and full light and the truce active overhead, and Harry walked toward Tom Riddle with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes open and the Slytherin awareness reading every detail with the precise attention it was built for. Voldemort was tall. Thin in the way of something from which softness had been carefully removed rather than never present. The red eyes were the most inhuman thing about him, not the flat face, not the pale skin, but the eyes, which held the particular quality of someone who had made choices so definitive that they had restructured his perception of everything. He moved with the controlled grace of someone for whom power was so deeply habitual that its physical expression had become unconscious. He was looking at Harry the way Harry was looking at him. Precisely. Carefully. Adjusting. They stopped 10 feet apart in the cathedral light of the ancient trees. "You're younger than I keep expecting," Voldemort said. His voice was exactly as Harry remembered, cold and precise and capable of warmth the way a scalpel is capable of warmth, technically but not functionally. "And you're shorter than the graveyard made you seem," Harry said. Sirius made a very small sound behind him. Voldemort looked at him for a moment with an expression that might have been surprise, recalibrated into something else. Not offense. Something more like recalibration. "I received the account of your Gringotts ritual from 3 separate sources," he said, "and each account was more extraordinary than the last. I wanted to see for myself." "And?" Harry said. "You are what the ledger says you are," Voldemort said simply. "I can feel the 4 lines in you from here. I have Slytherin's blood in my own inheritance, diluted and degraded by a century of neglect, but enough to recognize its source when it stands in front of me." He paused. "The compact is activated. The ley lines registered it. The forest registered it." He glanced, almost imperceptibly, at the trees. "Even here." "Then we both know the context," Harry said. "What did you want to say?" Voldemort's eyes moved to Harry's companions briefly, then back. "I want to propose something that you will initially refuse but which I think, if you consider it honestly, has considerable logic." "Go ahead." "You hold a title that supersedes every existing structure in magical Britain," Voldemort said. He spoke with the precise, engaged cadence of someone making an argument they believe in, and Harry listened with full attention because the most dangerous arguments were the ones made by people who believed them. "You have the legal authority to remake magical society from the foundation upward. The ministry, corrupted, inefficient, obsessed with Muggle deference. The current social structure, a farce, a pretense of order maintained by fear and political inertia." He paused. "I have spent 30 years attempting to change this structure through force, which I acknowledge has been imprecise. But the objective, the elevation of magical people to their proper place, the construction of a society that genuinely honors what magic is, that objective is sound. With the authority you carry, you could achieve it legitimately. Completely. Permanently. And in exchange?" Harry said. "My support. My networks. My knowledge of every political vulnerability in the current system." A pause. "And my allegiance." The forest was very quiet. The light came down in columns. Harry looked at him. He took his time. He let the silence be what it was, and he watched Voldemort's face during it, the precise, controlled patience of someone who believed they'd made a compelling offer and was waiting for it to be recognized as such. "The objective isn't sound," Harry said. "I've just explained, you explained your objective," Harry said. "Which is not the elevation of magical people. It's the elevation of magical people who meet your definitions of proper magic. Pure bloods. People like you, or people you've decided are acceptable. Everyone else, Muggle-borns, half-bloods, magical creatures, anyone whose magic doesn't match your ideal, they're not elevated in your system. They're erased from it. The magic of the bloodlines is exactly as strong in Hermione as it is in you," Harry said. "Stronger, if we're being honest about it. And she has Muggle parents." He let that land. "The Compact's ethical provisions, which are binding on the Rex Perpetuus and which I have read carefully, prohibit laws that harm magical beings without cause. Your entire ideology is a law that harms magical beings without cause. Which means my authority and your agenda are incompatible at the foundation, not at the edge." Voldemort looked at him. The red eyes were very still. "You've prepared for this." "I've thought about it honestly," Harry said. "There's a difference." "You're 16, Voldemort said, and there was something in it that was not quite contempt and not quite respect, but the exact midpoint between them. "You were 16 when you started making the choices that brought you here," Harry said. "I don't think you get to use that as a disqualification." Another silence. The cloaked figure behind Voldemort had gone very still in a way that was different from the stillness of the Death Eaters, more attentive, almost vibrating. The prophecy, Voldemort said. He shifted the subject with the smooth precision of a man changing tactics in real time. Neither can live while the other survives. You know the prophecy. I know it, Harry said. The compact doesn't change it. The prophecy was written about me as the chosen one, Harry said. The boy who lived. The symbol of the resistance to your return. He met the red eyes steadily. The compact is older than the prophecy by 7 centuries and supersedes any magical compact made after it. The Rex Perpetuus is not bound by prophecies made about individuals. The compact's own provisions are clear on the primacy of the foundational sovereign authority. He paused. Hermione confirmed that 3 times with different source texts. She would, Voldemort said, and there was something almost human in it, a flicker of something that recognized intellectual rigor even while opposing it. Who told you about my parents? Harry said. The shift in subject was deliberate, and he watched the shift land on Voldemort's face and watched him process it and decide on a response, and all of that told Harry things. Who told me about the prophecy, Voldemort said, correcting the framing, is not something I chose to share. I'm not asking about the prophecy, Harry said. I'm asking about my parents specifically. You went after them specifically. Not the Longbottoms, even though they were equally valid targets under the prophecy's language. You chose the Potters. He held the red eyes. Someone pointed you at us. Someone who knew about the Convergence inheritance and wanted to prevent it. Someone who understood what would happen if James Potter and Lily Evans had a child. He paused. I want the name. The silence that followed was the most interesting thing that had happened in the conversation. Because Voldemort did not refuse immediately. He looked at Harry for a long moment and the red eyes were doing something, not quite guilt, not quite discomfort, but something in the range of a man encountering a truth he has compartmentalized and finding it harder to maintain the compartment than expected. The information was given to me voluntarily, Voldemort said finally, by someone who had reason to want the prophecy child identified quickly. At the time I had no reason to question the specificity of the guidance. A pause. In retrospect, I recognize that the guidance was targeted. They used you, Harry said. Not with satisfaction, without heat. Voldemort's expression did something complicated. I don't intend to give you the name today, he said. That information has value and I am, above all, a practical man. I know, Harry said. I expect to acquire it through other means regardless. I'm asking you now because I wanted to watch your face when I asked it. He paused. And because I wanted you to understand that I already know more than you think, and that the person who pointed you at my parents was working against both of us. The red eyes were very still. That's an interesting claim, Voldemort said quietly. It's the truth. Harry looked at him with the complete, Ravenclaw clear certainty of someone who has followed every thread to its end. Someone used you as a weapon to prevent the convergence. They failed. The convergence occurred anyway, 14 years late, but it occurred. And now you and I are both standing in a forest dealing with the consequences of someone else's interference. He paused. Which means we have, at minimum, one shared interest. Finding out who. The silence was long this time. The columns of light shifted as clouds moved somewhere above the canopy. The old trees stood in their ancient patience. You genuinely believe that, Voldemort said. I know it. And you're telling me this, offering this, with nothing in return. I'm telling you because it's true and because the Rex Perpetuus doesn't deal in strategic omissions, Harry said. The compact is built on honesty as a structural requirement. I'm not offering you anything. I'm informing you of a fact that changes your understanding of your own history. Voldemort looked at him for a very long time. You are nothing like what I expected, he said finally. No, Harry agreed. I'm not what anyone expected. I'm something older. Behind Harry, he was aware of his Sirius's carefully controlled breathing, Hermione's absolute stillness, Ron's presence as solid and unmoving as stone, McGonagall's utter composure. None of them had spoken. All of them had been exactly what was needed, which was present and steady, and a demonstration that what stood behind Harry was not just power but loyalty of the kind that didn't require performance. "I'm going to establish the sovereignty publicly in September," Harry said. "Under the Compact's provisions. The Wizengamot will be required to recognize it. The Ministry's authority restructures around it." He paused. "Whatever you intend between now and then, whatever moves you make, they will be measured against the Compact's provisions. The ley lines will respond accordingly. The magic of this land will respond accordingly." "That sounds very much like a warning," Voldemort said. "It's information," Harry said. "I told you, the Rex Perpetuus doesn't deal in strategic omissions." He turned. He didn't rush it, didn't treat it as a moment requiring dramatic exit. He simply turned, with the complete, unhurried certainty of someone who has said everything they came to say and has nothing left to prove, and walked back through the ancient trees with his four beside him. He'd gone perhaps 20 feet when Voldemort spoke behind him. "The name you want," Voldemort said. "For the person who directed my attention to the Potters." A pause. "It was given to me by an old man with a great many carefully maintained secrets. He came to me willingly, at the time, with what he presented as genuine conviction. I believed him because he believed himself." Another pause. "I will tell you this much without negotiation because you are right, it changes my history as much as yours." The name was accompanied by a silver instrument and a particular shade of blue light. Harry stopped walking. He didn't turn around. "A pensieve," he said. The word came out very quiet. "A very old one," Voldemort said. "With very specific contents." Harry walked out of the forest into the morning light. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes of the walk back to the apparition point. Sirius walked with his jaw set and his hands in his pockets, doing the mathematics Harry was also doing. Hermione was pale in a way that meant she'd done the mathematics faster and was further along in the implications. Ron walked with his shoulder brushing Harry's in the unconscious solidarity of someone who doesn't fully understand everything but understands that his presence is load-bearing and is committed to bearing it. McGonagall walked at the back. Harry didn't turn to look at her, but he heard her footsteps, steady, deliberate, each one placed with complete certainty despite what they'd just heard. "It could mean several things," Hermione said finally. She was building the argument as she spoke, testing it. "A pensieve with specific contents, a silver instrument, that's not necessarily, it doesn't prove, Hermione," Harry said. She stopped. "I know," he said. "We don't have certainty yet," she said. But her voice was doing something careful that meant she knew they were very close to certainty. "No," he said. "But we know where to look. The pensieve in Dumbledore's office. The silver instruments, dozens of them, humming and spinning, all through Harry's years at school. The carefully maintained secrets. The careful management of what Harry knew and when he knew it." Harry thought about the conversation in the entrance hall. "I did not know about your mother's lineage. I have spent the night considering whether this is because I failed to look carefully enough, or because I looked and was prevented from seeing. Which version was it? Or was there a third version that Dumbledore hadn't offered? That he'd looked, and hadn't been prevented, and had made a choice." "We go back to the castle," Harry said. "We talk to Dumbledore. Today. No build-up, no preparation time, no waiting for the right moment." He paused. "I want to have this conversation before he has time to construct a new version of the story." "Harry," Sirius said, and his voice was careful. "Whatever he did or didn't do, he's still, I know who he is," Harry said. "I'm not going into that conversation in anger. I'm going into it for truth." He looked at Sirius. "But I'm going in today." Dumbledore was in his office. He was always in his office. Harry had knocked on that door 100 times over 5 years and it had always opened to the same scene, the old man behind the desk, the portraits of previous headmasters drowsing in their frames, the pensieve on its cabinet, the silver instruments humming. Familiar and layered and, Harry now understood, deliberately maintained. An atmosphere of wisdom and age and gentle authority that made you feel, every time you sat in the chair across the desk, that you were in the presence of someone who knew everything important and would share the relevant portions when you were ready for them. Harry opened the door without knocking. Dumbledore looked up from his desk. His expression moved through something very quickly, recognition, assessment, a kind of bracing, and then settled into the honest, stripped-down quality Harry had seen in the entrance hall. He'd been expecting this. Perhaps not today, perhaps not this directly, but he'd been expecting it since Friday night at the latest. The meeting went well, I take it, he said. He told me something, Harry said. He crossed the room and sat in the chair without being invited, which he'd never done before and which felt, today, exactly appropriate. He looked at Dumbledore with the Ravenclaw clarity and the Gryffindor directness and the Slytherin patience all operating simultaneously. He said the information about the prophecy, the specific guidance that pointed him toward my parents rather than the Longbottoms, came from an old man with carefully maintained secrets. He said it was accompanied by a pensieve and a particular shade of blue light. Dumbledore looked at him. He did not speak immediately. Did you do it? Harry said. Straight. Simple. No performance. The silence was 10 seconds long and Harry held it without flinching and without pressure, just, open, and waiting, and watching. No, Dumbledore said. Harry felt something that was not quite relief and not quite its absence. But you knew, Harry said. I suspected, Dumbledore said. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at Harry with more honesty than Harry had ever received from this room. The man who went to Voldemort, the man whose pensieve Voldemort saw, I believe I know who it was. I have believed this for several years. I have not acted on that belief because my evidence was circumstantial and my certainty insufficient to make an accusation against someone of considerable standing without destroying myself in the process. Who? Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet. Who? Harry said again, and this time it was different, not louder, but deeper, with something underneath it that was not a threat exactly but that carried the full weight of what he was, and the office responded, the silver instruments falling still simultaneously, the portraits on the walls sitting up in their frames, the room itself holding its breath. Dumbledore looked at him and made a decision Harry could see him make. The decision to stop managing. Abraxas Malfoy, he said. Lucius Malfoy's father. Dead now, Dragon Pox, 1992, but active in the 1960s and 70s as Voldemort's most senior political operative. He had access to ministry records through several ministerial connections. He had the ideology and the intelligence to understand what the Evans bloodline might produce. And he had, Dumbledore paused. He had his son's ambition, but in a more patient form. He was playing a very long game. Harry sat with this. The concealment on Mum's records, he said. Abraxas. I believe so. And Lucius knows, Harry said. The question landed in the room and the answer was in Dumbledore's face before he spoke. I believe Lucius inherited his father's knowledge with everything else. Harry stood up. He felt very calm, the Hufflepuff patience, the bedrock certainty, not fury but something more enduring than fury. He looked at Dumbledore. You should have told me, he said. He said it without heat, with the honest, direct weight of a simple true statement. Not all of it. I understand why you held pieces back. But this specific piece. You should have told me. Yes, Dumbledore said. Simply. No caveats, no qualifications. I should have. I need access to Abraxas Malfoy's records, Harry said. Whatever the Ministry holds, whatever Gringotts holds. And I need it before the Wisengamot session in 4 days, because Lucius Malfoy is going to try to bind the Compact's authority at that session, and I want to be holding his father's interference record when he does it." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood, moved to the pensive cabinet, opened the drawer beneath it, and produced a sealed folder that Harry had never seen before. "I obtained these," Dumbledore said, placing the folder on the desk, 4 years ago. "At the time I told myself I was gathering evidence. In reality I was doing what I often do, holding information I wasn't sure how to use." He looked at Harry with something painful and honest in his expression. "They are yours. They have always been more yours than mine." Harry picked up the folder. Inside were copies of Abraxas Malfoy's private correspondence from the 1960s, ministry records showing his access to the Evans family files, and a pensive memory transcript, blue-inked, the distinctive color of Goblin archival memory translation, that documented, in precise, unambiguous detail, a meeting between Abraxas Malfoy and Tom Riddle in the winter of 1970. The meeting where the Potters were discussed. The meeting where a plan was made. Harry read it in the headmaster's office with the old portraits watching and Dumbledore sitting quietly across the desk, not speaking, allowing the truth its full weight. When he finished, he placed the transcript carefully on top of the other documents and looked out the window at the mountains. "For days," he said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I'll need you in the Wizengamot chamber," Harry said. "Not as headmaster. As a witness." "I'll be there," Dumbledore said. Harry picked up the folder and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. "The pensieve," he said, without turning around. "What's in it?" "Yours, specifically. The one Voldemort saw." A pause that was its own answer. "Something I should show you," Dumbledore said quietly. "Soon. Before September, and before the Wizengamot." Another pause. "Not today. I need," his voice, for the first time in the conversation, lost some of its steadiness. "I need a small amount of time to do this honestly. To show it to you the right way." Harry thought about it. About pushing. About the time and the urgency and the 4 days. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," Dumbledore agreed. Harry walked out of the office and down the moving staircase with the folder under his arm and the castle moving around him in its steady, warm pulse, and outside the window above the staircase the mountains were in late afternoon shadow, deep blue and certain, and he thought about Lucius Malfoy sitting somewhere elegant and comfortable with 30 years of political architecture around him, preparing to walk into a Wizengamot session in 4 days and make his calculated move. He thought about what Lucius would see when he walked in. He walked back to the North Tower, and the torches lit ahead of him as he went. Chapter 5, The Sovereignty of Magic. The pensieve showed Harry his mother at 17. Dumbledore had set it up in the Chamber of Foundation, which felt right, the cave's 4-color torchlight, the compact on its 4-stone table, the mountain's slow heartbeat in the walls. He'd carried it down himself, the old stone basin in both arms, with the careful deliberateness of someone performing an act of genuine penance, and he hadn't made a speech about it or offered preparation or qualification. He'd just stepped back and let Harry approach it. The memory was Dumbledore's own, from the summer of 1976. Harry stepped into it and found himself in a garden, not Hogwarts, somewhere smaller, a cottage garden in full summer, roses going slightly wild, a wooden table with 2 chairs. Lily Evans was sitting in one of them with a book in her lap, and the first thing Harry noticed was how completely himself he recognized her, not from photographs, though he'd studied every photograph, but from something more fundamental. The quality of her attention, the way she held stillness like something chosen rather than default, the particular brightness that came off her that was not personality performing itself but magic in its truest, most unperformed state. She was extraordinary. Not in the way people told him she was extraordinary, with their careful past tense tenderness. Actually, immediately, undeniably extraordinary, the kind of magic that made the garden's roses grow slightly toward her and the summer light settle on her with particular warmth, the way it settled on things that were genuinely alive. Dumbledore, younger, auburn-haired, already carrying the particular quality of a man who is always slightly aware he is the most capable person in any room, sat across from her and said nothing for a while. Then, you know what I've come to discuss. Yes, Lily said. She looked at him with eyes that were his eyes, Harry realized, green and direct and without performance. You found something in the bloodline records. I'm afraid someone else found it first, Dumbledore said quietly. And acted on it. A pause. The Malfoy family. Abraxas, specifically. He has contacts in the Goblin Archive. He has understood, I believe, for some time, what your lineage means in combination with certain other bloodlines. He has moved to obscure it. Can it be undone? The concealment? Dumbledore was quiet. I believe so, in time. But Lily, the concern is not the records. The concern is that Abraxas will not stop at records. He has Voldemort's ear. And he is not the kind of man who does half measures. Lily looked at the garden for a long moment. Her hand was resting on the book in her lap and Harry watched it, watched her fingers, his fingers, the same shape, and felt something move through him that was not grief exactly but was in the same country as grief, and also not in that country at all, because grief was for absence and this was presence. He'll point Tom at us, she said. Not a question. If the lines converge, Dumbledore said. If you and James, he paused. The inheritance in question only activates through direct descent. Abraxas knows that. He'll want to prevent the descent entirely. A pause that was very careful. I came to warn you. And to ask what you want to do. Lily looked at him with those direct green eyes. What do I want to do, she repeated. Yes. I want to live my life, she said. I want to be with James, if that's what happens. I want to have a family, if that's what happens. I refuse to structure my entire existence around Abraxas Malfoy's fears about what my bloodline might produce. She paused. And if it produces what the records suggest it might, then that child will be exactly what the world needs, and no amount of interference will change it. She looked at him steadily. Will it? No, Dumbledore said. He said it with the weight of someone who has run every calculation and reached a conclusion that is both wonderful and terrifying. I don't believe it will. Then warn us, Lily said. Put the protections in place. But don't ask me to hide from the future. A pause. Whatever comes out of that future is going to be remarkable. I'd like it to know that. Harry stepped out of the pensive. The chamber of foundation was warm and quiet. Dumbledore was standing by the wall with his hands folded, watching him, and his expression had the quality of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has finally, with some difficulty, put it down. She knew, Harry said. She suspected, Dumbledore said. She was remarkable, Harry. In ways I didn't fully honor while she was alive. He paused. She wanted you to know she understood what she was building toward. That she chose it. Not the danger, but you. A pause. I should have shown you this years ago. That is simply true. Why didn't you? Because it would have required explaining what I suspected about Abraxas. And explaining that would have led to Lucius. And Lucius, at various points in your education, had wand-range proximity to you and significant political protection. He met Harry's eyes. I told myself I was protecting you. I was also protecting a situation I could control from one I could not. I am not entirely certain, even now, which motivation was primary. The honesty of it was, Harry thought, the most Dumbledore had ever given him. Not comfortable honesty that cast Dumbledore well. The other kind. Thank you, Harry said. For this. Dumbledore nodded, once. The Wisengamot session is tomorrow, he said. Are you ready? Harry looked at the compact on its 4-stone table. At the 4-color torchlight. At the mountain walls. Yes, he said. They traveled to London by flow from McGonagall's office at 8 in the morning, Harry, Sirius, Hermione, Ron, McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, and Dumbledore. 8 people arriving in the Ministry atrium one after another in quick succession, stepping out of the green fire and into the polished black marble with its fountain and its Ministry seal overhead and its sense of institutional permanence that Harry had always found slightly oppressive and now found simply insufficient. Like a large building that turned out to be a facade. The Ministry was busy in the particular urgent way it got when something significant was in motion. Harry felt it in the atmosphere before he saw it in the faces, the specific quality of people moving with purpose that was borrowed from someone else's urgency. Whoever had been managing the information about the compact had been managing it for a week, and in that week it had spread through every corridor of magical power in Britain, and everyone had been formulating their response, and all of those responses were converging today. The Wizengamot chamber was 3 levels below the atrium. By the time Harry reached the corridor outside it he had already received 17 significant looks from Ministry employees ranging from cautious to calculating to openly alarmed, and had responded to all of them with the same calm, present attention that was not a performance of being unbothered but was simply, genuinely, the natural state of someone who knows what they are and has stopped finding other people's uncertainty about it destabilizing. Thaddeus Rook was in the corridor. He'd been waiting, Harry thought. There was the particular stillness of someone who has been standing in one place long enough that they've made peace with the waiting. He looked at Harry with an expression that had evolved considerably since the pavement outside Grimmauld Place a week ago. The smooth professional confidence had developed real texture, the kind that came from a week of failed containment strategy and escalating reports from people who kept saying we cannot get ahead of this. Mr. Potter, he said. Mr. Rook, Harry said. He didn't stop walking. The minister would like to, I'm aware of what the minister would like, Harry said pleasantly, still moving. I'd be delighted to meet with the minister at a mutually convenient time, through the proper channels, with full documentation from both sides. As I mentioned last week. He looked at Rook directly for exactly 1 second. Today is not that time. He walked past him without another word. Sirius, passing Rook a moment later, said nothing and wore the expression of a man who is satisfied in a fundamental way. The Wizengamot chamber was circular, tiered, built to project authority in the direction of whoever stood at its center. 83 seats arranged in concentric arcs, all of them occupied today in the emerald robes that made the chamber look, on full assembly days, like a ring of dark forest. The Wizengamot seal overhead. The traditional witness box in the center, circular and exposed, designed for people being questioned to feel the weight of the institution bearing down on them. Harry walked in and stood in the center of the chamber and felt the institution's weight settle on him the way the ley lines in Knightswood had settled, not absent, fully present, and entirely insufficient. The chief warlock, an elderly wizard named Tiberius Ogden who Harry recognized from newspaper coverage, called the session to order with the traditional formal phrasing, and the chamber went through its opening ritual with the mechanical efficiency of centuries of practice, and all of it was exactly as formal and imposing as it was designed to be, and none of it changed the fundamental fact that Harry Potter was standing at the center of it holding a blood ledger and a folder of Abraxas. Malfoy's private correspondence and the full, awakened sovereign authority of a compact that predated this chamber by 400 years. Lucius Malfoy was in the second tier, second seat from the left. Harry found him immediately, because Lucius was the kind of man who positioned himself where he could see everything and had probably been doing it in this chamber for 20 years. He was watching Harry with the controlled, assessing quality of someone who has a plan they've spent a week refining and is ready to execute it. He was, Harry thought, genuinely formidable. Cold intelligence, genuine political expertise, 30 years of carefully constructed alliances. If he hadn't been working in the service of something fundamentally rotten he would have been an extraordinary asset to any institution lucky enough to have him. He was about to discover that formidable was not the same as sufficient. The session concerns the matter of an alleged activation of the Founders' Compact, Chief Warlock Ogden said, with the particular tone of a man who found the word alleged doing a great deal of heavy lifting, and the relevant question of whether any such activation carries binding legal weight under the existing structure of British magical law. Before Ogden could continue, Lucius Malfoy rose. He did it with the ease of a man exercising a familiar right, smooth and authoritative. Chief Warlock, he said, and his voice was exactly what you'd expect from a man who had refined every instrument at his disposal. With the Chamber's permission, I'd like to address a preliminary matter before we proceed to testimony. The chair recognizes Lord Malfoy, Ogden said. Thank you. Lucius turned to address the chamber broadly, which was technique. He was speaking to the 83 seats rather than to Harry, which made it feel institutional rather than personal, which was clever. The Founders' Compact, while a genuine historical document, is a pre-ministry legal instrument written in a context that no longer exists. The Ministry of Magic was established by parliamentary statute in 1707 and supersedes all pre-existing magical governance structures under the Supremacy of Established Institutions Act, passed by this very chamber in 1823. He paused, letting this settle. No document written in the 10th century, regardless of the magic attached to it, can override 700 years of established, functioning, democratically maintained magical law. What we are considering today is not a legitimate sovereignty claim. It is a historically interesting curiosity that has been, understandably, misinterpreted by a very young man without formal legal training. He said very young man with the precise weight of someone who had chosen those words to do specific work, not contempt, something more sophisticated, the tone of benevolent dismissal, which was harder to object to and more effective than open condescension. Several members of the chamber were nodding. Not all of them, perhaps a third, but a visible, significant third. These were Malfoy's people. The votes he'd spent 20 years cultivating. The chamber's position, Lucius continued, should be to formally acknowledge the historical significance of the compact while establishing through emergency declaratory legislation that the document does not carry current legal authority, and to ensure that any claims made upon its basis are, gently but firmly, redirected to appropriate historical scholarship. He sat down with the ease of a man who has placed a bet he's confident about. Ogden looked at Harry. The chair recognizes Mr. Potter, who has requested the opportunity to address the chamber. Harry looked at Lucius Malfoy for one moment, not hostile, not performing anything, just acknowledging the argument's existence, and then he turned to the chamber. The Supremacy of Established Institutions Act, 1823, he said. He said it conversationally, without notes, without preamble. Lord Malfoy is right that it exists and right about what it says. He's omitted one section. He looked around the chamber. Section 7, Paragraph 3, no act of this chamber or any successor institution shall supersede a pre-existing magical compact sealed by foundational sovereign magic, defined as magic operating at the level of ley line integration, landscape binding, or direct inscription in the institutional fabric of a standing magical structure of primary significance. The Founders' Compact is sealed by all three categories simultaneously. Section 7, Paragraph 3 was written specifically to prevent the situation Lord Malfoy is now attempting, using a general supremacy clause to override a specific foundational instrument. A pause. Two members of the chamber were already reaching for their own documents. Furthermore, Harry continued, with the Ravenclaw precision that was not cold but simply exact, the compact's validity has been formally confirmed by Gringotts, whose legal standing in matters of magical inheritance is established by the Goblin Autonomy provisions, incidentally, that no Ministry Act can supersede, because they are co-equal foundational instruments. The confirmation was entered into the public magical record 48 hours ago. He paused. Lord Malfoy was aware of this confirmation before he drafted his motion. He chose not to mention it. Lucius's expression had not changed. He was good enough that it wouldn't change visibly. But something behind his eyes had shifted into a different register, the register of someone revising strategy mid-execution, which was not comfortable territory for someone who preferred to operate from preparation. The blood ledger, Harry said, and produced it, holding it up so the chamber could see the gold writing, the goblin seal, the foundational runes along its edge. Confirmed by Gringotts Senior Heritage Director. Confirmed by the activation of the Founders' Compact itself, which every lay-sensitive magical person in Britain felt 9 days ago. Confirmed by Hogwarts Castle, which is the designated seat of sovereign authority under the Compact and which responded to the activation immediately. He lowered the ledger. The title is real. The authority is real. It is operating whether this chamber acknowledges it or not, because it operates at a level of magical law that does not require institutional acknowledgement to function. A pause, and something shifted very slightly in Harry's tone, not harder, but more honest, more present, more direct. But I am standing here today because I believe in the value of these institutions, not as they are, but as they could be. I am not here to replace this chamber. I am here to remind it of what it was built to serve. Lucius rose again. The chamber will note that Mr. Potter has not addressed the core legal question, which is whether, Lord Malfoy, Harry said. He said it quietly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't put anything into it that could be called a threat. He simply said it with the full, present weight of what he was, the four-line inheritance, the activated compact, the ley lines that knew his name, the ancient forest that had registered his arrival, the castle that lit its torches when he walked its corridors, and the chamber heard something in it that was not volume or drama but was simply, unmistakably, authority in its most fundamental form. Lucius Malfoy stopped speaking. He didn't sit down immediately. He stood for a moment, and in that moment Harry watched him do the calculation. He was fast, genuinely fast, that was real, and arrive at something he hadn't arrived at in a week of preparation, which was the specific understanding that the person in front of him was not a political opponent to be outmaneuvered but something categorically different, something operating in a framework his entire tactical vocabulary had not been built for. There's something else the chamber should have, Harry said, addressing Ogden, keeping everything procedural and correct. Documentation relevant to the history of the Founders' Compact and the circumstances of its delayed activation. Specifically, documentation relating to a deliberate interference with the Evans family bloodline records in the 1960s, undertaken by an individual with the specific intent of preventing the convergence inheritance. He produced the folder. He held it out to the Chief Warlock's aide who came to collect it automatically, as procedural instinct. The documentation includes private correspondence, ministry access records, and a pensive memory transcript. The individual responsible was Abraxas Malfoy. The chamber did not erupt. It made a sound that was quieter and more significant than eruption, the specific sound of 83 people receiving information that restructures their understanding of something they thought they knew, simultaneously. A collective, sharp inhalation followed by a silence that had substance. Lucius Malfoy sat down. Harry watched him do it. He watched the controlled, extraordinary effort it took, the discipline of a man refusing to show the full impact of what had just hit him, and he felt something that was not triumph and not satisfaction but was in the same neighborhood as recognition. This was what the Hufflepuff patience was for. Not passive endurance but the long, patient, root-deep certainty that truth, given time and space, finds its own level. The documentation, Harry said, will obviously require full examination by the chamber and its relevant committees. I am not asking for a verdict today. I am entering it into the record, where it belongs. He looked around the chamber once more. I am also, formally and for the record, invoking the sovereignty claim under Article 12 of the Founders' Compact, in the presence of this assembly, as a recognized gathering of magical persons under the Compact's provisions. He paused. The invocation will be completed at Hogwarts, at the start of term, before the full school. Today I am simply giving this chamber notice, as the compact requires. Ogden was looking at him with the expression of a man who has been Chief Warlock for 20 years and has never had a session go quite like this. The notice is received, he said, and his voice carried the particular weight of a man performing a formal duty and understanding that the duty is significant. Thank you, Harry said. He looked at the chamber one final time, at the emerald robes and the careful faces and the institutional weight of it all, and he felt no hostility toward it and no contempt. Only the clear, sober understanding of what it was, what it had become, and what it could still choose to be. I'd like the record to reflect, he said, that the invocation of the Sovereign Compact is not an act of conquest. The Compact's own provisions describe the Rex Perpetuus as custodian, not king. Keeper, not ruler. Whatever authority this title carries, it is held in trust for every magical being in Britain, not for any faction, not for any bloodline, not for any political position. He paused. That's what the founders built. That's what I intend to honor. He walked out of the chamber. The corridor outside was significantly more populated than when Harry had entered. Word traveled in the ministry the way it traveled everywhere, at the speed of people who understood that information was currency and were moving to spend it. There were a dozen ministry officials in the corridor who had not been there 20 minutes ago, positioned with the specific casualness of people who want to be present when something happens without appearing to have waited for it. Harry walked through them without stopping. Sirius fell into step beside him. Hermione on his other side, Ron behind with McGonagall and the others. One of the ministry officials, a woman in senior Auror robes, older, with sharp eyes and a direct expression that Harry liked immediately, fell into step alongside him. Auror Department Head Amelia Bones, she said, not slowing. I've reviewed the Gringotts documentation and the compact provisions. You handled the Malfoy motion correctly. Thank you, Harry said. I want you to know the Auror Department will extend professional cooperation to the Rex Perpetuus's office, when that office is formally established. She paused. We've been waiting for someone with legitimate authority to clean this up for 20 years. She peeled off and was gone before Harry could respond. Sirius watched her go. Amelia Bones, he said, with considerable approval. Yes. They reached the atrium and the fireplaces and Thaddeus Rook was there again, but something had shifted in his posture, the specific shift of a man who has received a rapid update and is revising his entire operational position in real time. He looked at Harry with an expression that was no longer smooth professional confidence or even controlled alarm. It was the expression of someone doing a genuine, rapid personal reckoning. Mr. Rook, Harry said pleasantly, not stopping. Mr. Potter, Rook said, and then, after a half-second pause that contained considerable internal activity, is there anything the minister's office can do to be helpful? Harry looked at him. He was genuine, Harry thought, not converted, not convinced of anything in particular, but a practical man recognizing a changed landscape and choosing a practical response. There was something in that worth working with. Tell the minister, Harry said, that I'll be at Hogwarts from now until September. The door is open. If the minister wants to be part of building something better, that conversation is available. He paused. But tell him also that I'm not waiting for ministry approval to proceed. The compact doesn't require it. He stepped into the fireplace and was gone. September 1st arrived the way significant days sometimes did, ordinary until it wasn't, the morning indistinguishable from any other morning until the weight of what it carried made itself felt. The students arrived on the Hogwarts Express and streamed through the castle gates and into the entrance hall, hundreds of them, first years wide-eyed and older students noisy with reunions, all of it exactly as it always was and all of it, Harry knew, about to become part of a day they described for the rest of their lives. He'd spent August in the castle. It had been the best month of his life in ways he hadn't expected and couldn't entirely explain. Not because of the power or the title or the strategic preparation, though all of those things had moved forward with a steady, satisfying momentum. Because of the quiet. Because of the long evenings in the North Tower with the mountains going purple and the founder's text spread across the desk and the castle humming around him like something contented. Because of Hermione working at the other end of the desk saying listen to this every 20 minutes. Because of Ron turning up on the Quidditch pitch one morning with 2 brooms and absolutely no agenda. Because of Sirius at breakfast every day, increasingly at ease in the castle that had once been only a place his best friend had loved, learning to love it himself. Because of McGonagall, who had taught him dueling 3 mornings a week with the ferocious, precise dedication of someone who had decided that if the future king of magic was going to be her student she was going to make sure he was genuinely ready, and who had said nothing at the end of the last session except adequate, which for McGonagall meant something like excellent. Because of Dumbledore, who had shown Harry the Pensieve's other contents, memories spanning 30 years, each one a piece of the whole picture, difficult and honest and, in their totality, the portrait of a man who had made choices Harry didn't agree with and who had, over the course of a month, been given the opportunity to reckon with them honestly, which he had taken. Their relationship was different now. Not warm in the comfortable old way, but real, which was better. The great hall seated every student, every teacher, every ghost, and a considerable number of additional guests who had received formal notice of the invocation and had made arrangements to be present. Dumbledore had sent the notices. Harry had approved the list, which included Amelia Bones, Ragnarok from Gringotts, and a carefully selected assembly of Wisengamot members who had indicated, through various channels, over the preceding weeks, that they were prepared to receive the invocation in good faith. Lucius Malfoy was not on the list. He had received a formal notice anyway, by legal requirement. Harry had signed it himself. Draco Malfoy was sitting at the Slytherin table when Harry entered. Harry saw him immediately, couldn't not, they had too much history for either of them to be invisible to the other, and what he saw in Draco's face was something more complicated than the hostility he'd expected. A month had passed since the Wisengamot session. A month in which the Abraxas Malfoy documentation had been formally examined and formally confirmed and reported in the Daily Prophet in terms that had, even accounting for the Prophet's limitations, clearly communicated that Lucius Malfoy's political standing had experienced a significant and rapid deterioration. Draco looked at Harry with the specific expression of someone who is in the process of understanding that the story they grew up inside was constructed rather than true. It was not a pleasant expression to wear. Harry knew it from the inside. He looked at Draco for a moment, not challenge, not sympathy, just, honest acknowledgement. You're figuring something out. That's real. And then he walked to the front of the hall. The invocation itself was not a speech. Harry had been clear about this when Hermione had offered to help him write something. He didn't want rhetoric. He didn't want the kind of language that performed significance. He wanted the actual thing. He stood at the front of the great hall and the hall went quiet in the particular way it sometimes went quiet when the quality of attention in a room changed, not because anyone asked for silence but because the room itself demanded it. Hundreds of faces, familiar and unfamiliar, young and old, the teachers along the staff table, Ragnarok in the visitors section with his copper eyes calm and expectant, Amelia Bones with her sharp attention, Dumbledore at the end of the staff table with his hands folded. Harry placed the blood ledger on the table in front of him. He spoke the invocation in the language of the compact, the archaic Latin and Founder's runic hybrid that the castle had been teaching him, patiently, through August. It was not long. 12 lines. Each line was a statement of receipt, acknowledging each of the 4 inheritances, acknowledging the obligations of the compact's custodianship, acknowledging the primacy of magic itself over any institutional claim upon it. He felt it happen as he spoke. Not gradually but in a single definitive moment, when the final line landed, the castle responded. The walls blazed the 4-color light simultaneously, every torch in the great hall, every torch in every corridor, the castle's entire magical infrastructure igniting in one clear, warm, undeniable acknowledgement. The enchanted ceiling stopped being a weather simulation and became something else. The 4 founders' constellations, never documented in any astronomy text, patterns that existed in no star chart but that were written in the foundations of the building and had been waiting to be displayed for 7 centuries. The ley lines, Harry felt them distantly, the way you feel a river when you're standing on its bank, registered the invocation and responded with the slow, geological certainty of something that had been waiting for this specific event since the earth was shaped to receive it. The room was completely still. And then Ragnarok stood. He stood with the formal deliberateness of a prepared act, and he bowed, the same deep, genuine bow he'd offered outside the Heritage Chamber 9 weeks ago, and he said, in Goblin and in English, the words of formal recognition that the goblins had preserved for 700 years against the possibility of this exact moment. Amelia Bones stood. She said something brief and precise in the formal language of the Aura Department's oath of service, modified. Harry heard the modification, it was exact, to reflect the compact's custodianship provisions rather than the ministry's authority. 3 Wisengamot members stood in succession. Then 4 more. Not all of them. Harry hadn't expected all of them. But enough that the recognition was real, was on record, was already irreversible. He looked at the students. At the hundreds of faces, first years who didn't fully understand what they'd witnessed, older students who understood different parts of it, Gryffindors and Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs and Slytherins all in their rows, the castle's four inheritances living and present in the community it had built. "I want to tell you what this actually is," Harry said, and his voice was conversational, direct, the voice he used with Hermione and Ron, and serious, not amplified artificially because the castle was doing that itself, carrying his voice to every corner with the same ease with which it lit his torches. "Not what the title sounds like. Not the history of it, which you can read in about 40 different sources now that the compact is public record." He looked around the hall. "This is a promise. Made in your presence. The magic of this land is not owned by any ministry or any family or any ideology. It belongs to itself, and to everyone who carries it, regardless of their blood status or their family name or which country their parents came from." He paused. "The compact makes me responsible for protecting that. Not for ruling over it. Not for deciding who deserves it. For making sure that every person in this hall and every person who'll sit in these seats after you has the freedom to be exactly what their magic is, without interference." He let that sit for a moment. "That's all. That's the whole thing. I didn't ask for it and I'm not performing it. It's just what's true." The quiet that followed was different from the silence before he'd spoken. Fuller. More considered. The kind of quiet that meant something had been received. It was Neville Longbottom, of all people, who broke it, sitting at the Gryffindor table with his broad, honest face and his grandmother's stubbornness in his jaw, Neville who had stood in every hard place Harry had ever stood and been there when most people would have found reasons not to be. Neville stood up and put his hands together. No ceremony about it. Just a person who had decided that this was worth standing for. And then the hall stood up. Not in the organized, prompted way of official ceremonies. In the genuine, slightly chaotic, completely unmistakable way that happened when a room full of people made individual decisions simultaneously and those decisions happened to be the same decision. Students from every table. Teachers along the staff table, Flitwick nearly knocking over his water glass in his enthusiasm, Sprout with soil she'd somehow managed to acquire still on her hands, McGonagall standing with her hands clasped and her expression doing the thing it did when she was moved and had decided to allow it. Harry looked at them and felt, this specific thing. Not the geological warmth of the compact or the four-strand river of the inheritance or the castle's ancient heartbeat. Something smaller and warmer and more real than any of those things. The particular, irreplaceable feeling of being seen by people who actually know you. He found Ron at the Gryffindor table, grinning in the specific way that meant told you without any prior conversation to be told about. He found Hermione standing with her hands pressed together in front of her mouth and her eyes doing the thing they did. He found Sirius in the visitors section with his arms crossed and his face doing something he was completely failing to conceal and clearly had no intention of concealing. Dumbledore was looking at him from the staff table with an expression Harry had no category for. Not pride, exactly. Something older and more complicated and more honest. Something in the territory of a man who has lived a very long time and has been, occasionally, wrong about what the important things were, and is standing in the moment of understanding that fully. Harry picked up the blood ledger and held it. The four-color light in the walls had settled into something steady and warm, not blazing now but present, background warmth, the way a fire becomes background warmth when the room has been warm long enough. The Founder's constellations were still on the enchanted ceiling, those unmapped patterns of ancient stars, permanent now in the castle's sky. This was not an ending. He was clear about that. Lucius Malfoy still had political resources and a damaged but not destroyed network, and whatever his next move would be it would be careful and cold and worth monitoring closely. Voldemort was somewhere in Britain with his philosophy intact and his forces incomplete but real, and the conversation in the forest was a beginning, not a resolution, the beginning of an endgame that was coming and that Harry was, for the first time in his life, genuinely ready for. The Ministry was in the early stages of a structural adjustment that would take years and considerable sustained effort. The Gringotts still had members who would fight the compact's provisions through every procedural mechanism available to them. None of that was over. He hadn't expected it to be. What was over was the chapter where Harry Potter didn't know what he was. He walked out of the great hall through the staff entrance, into the corridor, and the torches blazed ahead of him as he went, all of them, the whole length of the corridor, light racing ahead of his footsteps the way it had since the morning he'd first walked these halls and the castle had known him. He stopped at the window at the end of the corridor and looked out at the grounds, the lake silver in the September morning, the mountains enormous and patient, the sky clear and enormous with the particular clarity of the first real autumn day. The castle hummed its deep note around him. The 4 strands of inherited magic moved through him like rivers that had always been rivers and had always been his. The ley lines somewhere deep in the Scottish earth registered his presence with the slow, certain recognition of geography acknowledging something that belongs to it. He thought about his mother at 17, sitting in a summer garden, saying I refuse to structure my entire existence around someone else's fears about what my bloodline might produce. He thought about his father, who had spent his life moving towards something he could feel but couldn't name, who had loved a woman and built a family and trusted the future enough to put his name on it. He thought about Sirius in Azkaban imagining a boy he hadn't met yet. He thought about Hermione in a kitchen on a birthday morning reaching for books she'd already bookmarked because she'd known, even before she knew, that this was coming and that it would require her best. He thought about Ron standing up in a forest and saying I'm coming with you before he had all the information, because that was how Ron loved people, with the full weight of himself, before the evidence was complete, because the person was enough. Harry leaned against the window frame and looked at the mountains. Somewhere out there the world was arranging itself around a new reality, imperfectly and noisily and with considerable political complication, which was how the world always arranged itself around new realities. Somewhere in it Voldemort was thinking carefully about a conversation in a forest and what it meant for calculations he'd built over 30 years. Somewhere in it Lucius Malfoy was sitting in a diminished drawing room working out what he still had and what he could still do. Somewhere in it the Ministry was having 17 urgent meetings. Somewhere in it the ley lines of Britain ran deep and warm and patient through the ancient earth, carrying in them the memory of every magical thing that had ever happened in this land and the steady, underground certainty that magic did not belong to anyone who could not hold it honestly. Harry pushed off from the window frame. He had work to do. Actual, specific, daily work, the kind that didn't look like kingship but was, the kind that involved people and complications and the slow, imperfect, irreplaceable process of building something better than what existed before. He was 16. He had years of it ahead of him, and the years didn't frighten him, and the complication didn't frighten him, and the people who would push back against every single thing he was trying to do didn't frighten him. He knew what he was. He walked back into the castle, into the 4-color light, into the warmth of the place that was his and that he was, and the torches burned ahead of him all the way down the hall.